All right, we're on YouTube, everybody. What's going on? Let's speedrun rating every single card in the set, starting in the color pie with white. Now, let's rate these for standard play. If you're interested in limited, then I've already done the pre-release guide. So go check that out. Link in the description of the YouTube video, all that. If you're watching on Twitch, go watch pre-release guide after this. But our best time ever is, again, I think I was telling chat, it's 2:42, 2 hours and 42 minutes. So let's try to beat that time. Starting now with Angelican's Observer. This I've already messed up. Angelican Observer. Angelic Observer is 6 mana, 5 and a white for a 3/3 Angel Advisor, and it costs 1 less to cast for all the citizens you control as flying. I would not necessarily try to force citizens in standard. I don't think it's very good. I don't think this card's very good. I'll give this a 1.75 or so. You know, you might try to do it in like a janky little budget citizens deck, but even in the citizens deck, it's probably not worth playing. Backup Agent is a 2 mana thing that's a 1/1 and puts a +1/+1 counter on a creature when it ETBs. Card's not great. We've seen cards like this in green, and even though they sometimes see fringe play in budget decks, it's just like a 1 1/4. Ballroom Brawlers. It had the word luchadors in the title when it was still untranslated. So I like to think of this as a couple of wrestlers just doing a fight dance. You know, I kind of want to like this card in limited, but I know this isn't a limited list. It almost made the pre-release guide, even though 2 white pips, 3/5 for 5 isn't as good as it used to be, but I do think the abilities are cool. That said, in standard, a 1. Boon of Safety. This is where things kind of get interesting. This is kind of like Snakeskin Veil or Tamiyo Safekeeping in white, and we haven't had one of these in white since Fight is 1, at least one that costs 1 mana. So in these like clever Lumamancer decks, Mono White Magecraft, Blue White perhaps, Blue White Target Me, there's a couple, that's going to be a thing. You know, with the Drake that draws you a card and the new 2-drop that does stuff when you target it in this set. We'll get to that in a minute. A card like this could actually be really good. So I'll give this like a solid 2.5, you know, fringe playable in those decks that don't have access to sort of better protection effects than this. But let's move it along, everybody, to Broker's Initiate. I actually kind of want to like this, but that's because I'm dumb. I like 1-drops that get better as the game goes on and actually have some sort of use, but this doesn't really have much use. It's a Yoke Dox, you know. It's a 1 mana 0/4 in the meantime, and even once you do get to, you know, activate its ability, that's all your mana most of the time. So I don't know. I'll give this like a 1 1/4. Buy Your Silence is kind of neat, but it is 5 mana. So even though it's an exile almost any permanent thing, right, with a pretty bad downside, but still, it's probably better that your opponent has a treasure token than a planeswalker, so there is that. But the sorcery speed, the high casting cost, this card's like a 1.5. Celebrity Fencer is actually very cool. I don't like the casting cost on this card, but as like a budget player, you know, wants to play some like budgety, maybe tokensy kind of action, I kind of like it. So I'll give this a 1.75, but I don't think it really does anything in standard. Citizen's Crowbar is interesting. Right, I actually like a good bit about this card, but even though you can look at this as like a 3 mana 1/1 with a disenchant effect stapled onto it, I mean, when you pay the 2 mana for it, you immediately get a 1/1, but, you know, people are playing 2 mana 3/3s in this set and stuff like that. So you're not going to feel great when you pay 2 mana for your 1/1, and you don't get like a Prosperous Innkeeper or something, but I still think there's a lot of ways in which this card is kind of interesting. So I'm not going to just count it out. I'll give it a 2 1/4. I don't think it's a bad card, but I just think that there's going to be better ways to use slots in most decks, right? So I don't think it's going anywhere, but cool card that at least gives you a creature and can be a disenchant effect or can be an equipment. There's a lot the thing does, and it might slot into these Boros Equipments decks, you know, as kind of a main deck way to not have to go down on the number of equipments you're playing, but still have ways to bust up, you know, versatile permanent types. So that's, you know, could be, but I doubt it. Dapper Shieldmate is up next. This card I'm not super impressed by. I do like that it's kind of a 4/2, and it's kind of protected from having the 2 toughness by having the shield counter on it. But still, it's probably kind of a bread and butter aggressive-ish common for the Cabaretti and stuff like that. And as far as standard play goes, no, it's like a 1.25. I'll give it a quarter. Depopulate is the best card that we've seen so far. We're coming up on a vein of decent cards. Depopulate is a 3.75, right around the same level as like a Shatter the Sky, right? Although I imagine if monocolored aggro decks continue to be the norm, you know, these mono white aggro decks, there's been some rumblings about mono red as well. If that keeps being the norm, then a card like Depopulate is just Wrath of God, and it's very, very good. It could even be better than Wrath of God if you're playing multicolored guys. So this could be as high as a 4, and it's probably going to be pound for pound one of the highest rated cards in the set. That said, sweepers, I don't prioritize them as highly as I used to, but they're still obviously very good Magic cards. But Elspeth Resplendent is next. I really like this Planeswalker. I'm not going to lie to you. No spoilers for the top 25 or anything, but this is one of my favorite cards in the set. The more I think about it, the +1 isn't great, obviously, but it's very easy to get to the ultimate on this card. It's easier than it looks. It's just a couple of turns to get the ultimate. And the -3 is very good. A lot of people are poo-pooing the -3 because, oh, you just get like a 3-drop for your 5 mana. No, you get a 3-drop and a 2 loyalty Planeswalker, which is much better than just getting a 3-drop for 5 mana. I think it's a little disingenuous to say that. The fact that that's kind of her way of protecting herself, right? And it also gets a shield counter, which is like unbelievable. I think that this is actually a very good Planeswalker. It's going to have to be better than Lolth and some other 5-color Planeswalkers, but I think there's plenty of decks that still want to play maybe one copy of this. I think it's probably better than the 5-mana Kaya in some ways. So even though it doesn't have a removal mode on it, I do still like this Planeswalker, so I'll give it a 3.25. I think it's right at 3.5, somewhere in that neighborhood. Extraction Specialist, I've kind of cooled on this card a little bit the more I look at it, but there are cool tricks in Standard with it, right? You can pull a Luminarch Aspirant out of your graveyard, and that doesn't have to attack. Not necessarily. To give you value. The same thing is true of like a Prosperous Innkeeper, pull that out of your yard. Pull a, you know, the mono-white Adversary out of your yard, and if you have extra mana to spend on it later in the game, then, you know, you get the Adversary back, and you can maybe pump 2 more mana into it, right? So, you know, there's cool things you can do with Specialist. The lifelink on a 3-mana 3/2 is not something you can just, like, I don't know, ignore, right? So, like, the body's not terrible. And I do think the card is good, but whether or not it finds its way into decks is another thing entirely. I'm not sure where the good home for this is. I don't know that it's mono-white aggro, even though that's where all the good targets are. I'm just not sure the card is worth the slots in those decks, or it's aggressive enough, right? So I can't really make my mind up on how I feel about Specialist, but I will give this card like a 2.75. I think that it has the potential, especially when we get some like really good 2-drops revealed in the next couple of sets, to be one of the better cards, kind of one of the most improved cards once it gets more things to reanimate, but it already has some good options. Remember, 2.75 is pretty good. Gathering Throng is next. One of these, but it's not a 2/2, it's a 3/1. These don't often see too much Standard play. So even with the extra power on it, and the lower toughness in this case, that makes it more susceptible to Meathook Massacre. That's not good in this format. So there, you know, there's that. But I just don't really see this format being conducive to this kind of creature right now. There's better white 3-drops. You don't want to use 4 slots on this, blah, blah. So I'll just give it like a 2. You know, like it's fun to play with, but it's probably not playable in the current Standard. Giada Font of Hope, one of my favorite cards in the set, man. Like this is only good in the one deck. It really, there is one thing this goes in, but it could potentially be like maybe one of the better tribal cards of all time. You know, a 2-mana 2/2 Flying Vigilance is already not embarrassing. Also, a lot of people are misreading this. You can get multiple +1/+1 counters on an Angel that you play because of this. It's not just a +1/+1 counter from Giada, right? You get a +1/+1 counter on each Angel you control for each one you already control, or each Angel you play. For each one you already control. That is unbelievable. That's really sick. So, I like this card a lot. I think that it's going to really help out the Angels deck, but it doesn't really do much for anything else, right? So, I'm kind of forced to give the card like a 2.75, even though it's very, very good. I'll go ahead and round it off at 3. Even though it's only good in the one deck, I'll round it off at 3. Halo Fountain is next. Really depends on who you talk to here. I put this in the Sleepers video, because from what I can tell, most people who are spikes, at least on the internet, don't take this card seriously. But I got a lot of comments that were saying this isn't a sleeper. This is, you know, a very, very good card, and everybody knows it. It is like $10 right now. but I figured that $10 was mostly for commander playability. But card does look pretty good, right? You know, it creates creatures, and then those creatures can in turn, you know, help you draw cards off of this card. And I don't know that you're ever going to win the game off of it, but I've said it before, it doesn't matter. That's not the thing about the card that matters. People have said that it doesn't do anything when it comes into play. It's a do nothing, you know, 3 mana thing. But no, you'll probably wait until you have 4 mana, right? And you drop it after an attack, make a guy. That guy can block now. So, you know, drawing cards off of this I think is no joke whatsoever. It doesn't play well with vigilant creatures, but you don't care. So I do think that Fountain is awesome. Quite awesome. And I can't rate it super highly, though. You know, at the end of the day, I don't know that it's going to take over Standard to be this like super important card, but it does look like a good Magic card, especially for Commander players. But we're here for Standard, and in that format, I'm going to give it a 2.75, about the same as Extraction Specialist, right? Good card, could see play, but will it? I don't know. I actually think that Extraction Specialist is more likely to see play. It's more like generically good than a Halo Fountain, which has to be built around. Halo Fountain is much more of a build around, but it's obviously a pretty powerful looking Magic card. Hold for Ransom is next. This is just a worse pacifism, so I don't... Who cares? It's like a 1.5 because it's a removal spell. Illuminator Virtuoso. This is the other target me guy from this set. This is just a 2-mana 1/1 double strike, which is already like a fencing ace. That's fine. But when it becomes a target of a spell, connives. That's stupid. That's so good. This has to be... A lot of these connive creatures, especially the relatively cheap ones, I like in like Reanimator decks and stuff. This I don't like as much because, you know, you have to target it with something and you probably don't play a whole lot of spells like that in Reanimator decks. So I don't think it's great for like the same sort of flashbacky stuff, although it does play well with like Homestead Courage, which you want to play in the same deck as this guy. So, you know, good looking card, probably only good in the one sort of mono-white Magecraft or blue-white Magecraft deck, but probably the best addition that deck got in a set full of decent additions. So, card's good. I'm going to give it a 2.75. I think it's up there with some of the other cards we've just looked at that look very good. Obviously, it's not the same card as Halo Fountain or Extraction Specialist, but it's a 2.75 in a different way. I think it's just almost generically powerful in some ways, but you know, in a deck that that does play towards it, it's probably going to be the best card in your deck. Earlier, I was talking about, you know, a lot of 2.5s are cards that are only good in the one deck, and they're not even the best card in their deck. That sort of applies to this, but this is going to be the best card in its deck, very likely. So, you know, I'll go ahead and give it to it. 2.75. Inspiring Overseer is one of my favorite commons in the whole set. You know, it's a Cloudkin Seer mixed with whatever the 3-mana dwarf was, you know. The 3-mana dwarf didn't gain a life. Or, excuse me, the 3-mana dwarf didn't fly, but it did gain a life and draw a card. Cloudkin Seer didn't gain a life. This is just... basically, screw it, we'll make a strictly better version of Cloudkin Seer. And that's kind of good. From a budget perspective, I like this card a lot. I'm not sure how much standard play it sees, but it does look good in like Teleportation Circle, if that card ever gets a foothold in standard. So I can't say that it's going to like take over top tables. It is a 3-drop Angel, and we know we're going to be playing Angels decks. So he maybe needed a decent 3-drop playable standard Angel. So it could see play there, right? So I'll give this card a 2.5. I think that's pretty good. It's somewhat versatile. Could see play in multiple decks. It's not like it only sees play in the one deck, but might be important in the Angels deck, and that's where I think it's most likely to see real play. But could just be a sort of, you know, bread and butter kind of card for certain decks, but we've probably got better 3-drop options. Like Restoration of Iganjo is probably a better card, right? But, you know, still give it like a solid 2.5. It's a fine card. Killshot is not a super good card, but I'll still give it like a 1.5. It's a removal. Knockout Blow, also not super great, right? But I'll kind of give it the same. I meant to put I think I meant to put Killshot instead of Knockout Blow in the pre-release guide. So there's that. I guess they're both removal spells that you'll play in your sealed deck. One way or the other, they both get about the same. Even though Knockout Blow is a better sideboard card, so I guess I should give it a 2 or 2.25, something like that. Mage's Attendant. Good lord, I think this card is very good. At first, I was kind of off it. I felt like everyone was overrating it, but the more I look at Mage's Attendant, the more I like it. 3 mana for 4 power on 2 guys, both of which have relevant party types. Keep that in mind. I think that might matter. It's just a little bit of gravy, but I think it's delicious, right? Party is not a thing we think about, but it's a thing the card does. And, you know, the Mana Tithe ability might put your opponent off their sweeper by a turn. Maybe it makes it even harder to cast a card that you got with an elite spellbinder, right? So there's some cool things about Mage's Attendant. I think Mana Tithe in Standard is something to get excited about. And so it's hard to rate this, but I'm gonna actually give it like a 3.25. Like I really think that it's about that good. You have to be very good as a white 3-drop to see play in a Standard where there are a lot of very good white 3-drops. But I think this fits the bill. I think this works. I think this makes it. Mysterious Limousine up next. This is a cool little card. It really is. Kind of a super Banishing Priest, or, I guess Skyclave Apparition to use a more recent example. But, you can pick up your own guys, drop them off a little bit later to get an ETB trigger repeated. The crew cost is relatively low. You get an ETB trigger on it too. So just overall, I think Limousine is solid, but probably slightly expensive. But looking at the other 5-drops in white in the format, I think I'd probably rather play this than AO. Which is saying something because I really like AO. But I do still like this card. And I'm going to give it... That one's tough, actually. I'm going to give this card a 2.5. I don't think it's quite as good as like a 2 3/4, but I do think it's a fine card. I like this card. Patch Up is next. This is the Call of the Death Dweller in white. It doesn't give your creatures like counters, but you can technically get more creatures back. You could use this to get back 3 Serrated Scorpions back in the day in that deck. I would have liked that more than Call of the Death Dweller a lot of the time. I'm going to give this card a 3. I think it's a very solid card, like super solid for Aristocrats decks and stuff like that. I think this could actually end up seeing, 1 or 2 play the same way Call of the Death Dweller did. I probably would have given Call of the Death Dweller about a 3 back in the day, So really good-looking card here. Very good-looking card. If you haven't really looked at it yet, read it. It's fantastic. Rabble Rousing. I have seen a fair amount of people talk about this card in this set. I think this is very, very good if you get it in your sealed pool and you're in, like, Cabaretti or something. I think you just play this in your sealed pool if you get it. It's a ridiculous bomb. But, when it comes to triggering Alliance, say, in Limited, I think this is probably very good. But I think all the stuff that you want to do with this in Standard is probably a little too slow, a little too janky, a little too leave it to the stream, leave it to Mono Black Magic or CGB when he's feeling, not super competitive on a day, something like that. I don't think Rabble Rousing is where it needs to be a super standard playable card. I could be wrong. This could be the finisher in like a Naya tokens deck or green-white tokens deck. Because 5 mana is not too much to ask. It's really not. But, when I'm looking at mono white doesn't really want to play 5-drops in the first place. And if it does, probably doesn't want to play this. It probably wants something else. So I don't know. Maybe this is one of the sleepers in the set and I'm just missing it. But I think that there are probably better things you could be doing for 5 mana right now. And this is, opponents can play around it. It's terrible after a sweeper. It's just, I want to like this card more than I do, and I know a lot of you do like it, but I think there's a lot of issues with the card. But I still, just mostly for jank purposes and things I'm excited about trying to do on stream, which again, I think there's plenty of those things, I'll give this card a solid 2 1/4. I think that, let's give it a 2.5. Let's give it a 2.5. No, let's give it a 2 1/4. Let's give Rabble Rousing a 2 1/4. I think if you're building tokens decks, you could probably do more for 5, honestly. And I know that's a lot for 5 mana, but I really do think you could do more. But I want to proc Alliance with it. It's super bad. But next is Rafine's. I wonder what Chad is saying about that. We'll see. But Rafine's Guidance is up next. This could actually see some amount of play in the the Naya Runes decks. Maybe it's just a one-of. You can play it out of your yard. That'll proc your Generous Visitor. That'll proc your Kami. That'll proc your well, it won't proc, but it'll make your, Michiko's Reign of Truth better, or your Portrait of Michiko. So, this is a thing you can play out of the graveyard every turn, and the Naya Runes deck probably wants that kind of, extra grind in the late game, but it probably doesn't want more than, 1 copy of this, and the only real reason to play the card is to trigger your stuff that triggers off of playing enchantments. The actual benefit of the card isn't that great, so... I don't know. I think the card could see fringe play in 1 or 2 very specific sort of enchantressy decks that are already a little bit on the downswing in Standard at the moment. So, I don't know. I have to give the card a 2, at the highest. But I wouldn't actually put this card past seeing, again, 1 of Standard play. Rafine's Informant is next. I very much like this card a good bit. I don't think that it's ultra powerful. I just think that it's kind of where you want to be when looking for Dece 2-drops. It just kind of fits the bill. Okay stats, even if you don't get the +1/+1 counter. But if you do, very good stats on your 2-drop. And you get to draw, churn, fuel your reanimator strategies. So many things the card does for a relatively low investment while still developing your board state. There's a lot of good things about this card early in the game or even later in the game. So if you're holding on to a land, you play your Rafine's Informant on turn 8, then it helps you draw a fresh card. That's fine too. So I really like this, but I can't really give it more than like a 2.75 or a 3, somewhere in that neighborhood, because I don't think it's powerful. I don't think it's a super powerful card. I think it's just one of those curve filling, sort of bread and butter, generically decent, if you're looking for a 2-drop in your mid-range deck, it's fine kind of cards. So I think it's probably going to see some play in Standard, maybe. Merfolk Branchwalker was a card that benefited from a lower power Standard environment. We're not necessarily in that right now. I think Standard is more powerful than it was in the days of Ixalan. So, this card might not be as good as I want it to be, but it's still a fine card for certain strategies. I'll give it, 2.9, something like that. Refuse to Yield is a bad card. It's just not... It's a meme. Don't do it. It's a 1. Revelation in Power is also... It's not a meme, but it's just kind of a 2-mana combat trick. You're not going to be playing these in Standard. Give it a 1.25. Rumor Gatherer. I say you're not going to play him in Standard. There's a mono-white Magecraft deck, but I still don't think the card's good for that deck. Rumor Gatherer is not as good as Welcoming Vampire and costs more white pips. Just it's meant for, limited play mostly. But I still think the card is okay, so I have to give it like a 1.75. It's not a bad card. Sanctuary Warden will not benefit from the play of like Vanishing Verse that we see a lot of in Standard right now. And for that matter, Meathook Massacre takes us out without caring about the shield counters. So not in a great position now, but might be later when those cards rotate out, obviously. But even in the time being, I said this set has a lot of multicolored cards in it. That might mean we see fewer Vanishing Verses, not 0. I don't think we'll ever see 0 while it's in the format, but we'll see fewer Vanishing Verses in a format where there's more multicolored creatures, right? So maybe this card can benefit from the pseudo exit of a card like Vanishing Verse, but I don't think anybody's going to, even with depopulating the format, I don't think people are going to stop playing, Meathook Massacre anytime soon. Matter of fact, if creatures with shield counters on them are important in any way, I would expect more Meathook Massacres if I were you. So it's kind of hard to see where this card's going to sit in the meta, but there's a lot of sort of theory crafting you can do with it. But 6 mana for a card that dies to a 2-mana instant speed removal spell is probably not where you want to be in current Standard. The card might be a 3 later on in life, but where we are right now, I'm going to give it like a 2.5. Even though the text box on it is incredibly powerful, and I want to reanimate this card. And I think that in a vacuum, the card is probably a 3.25, right? But where we are right now, specifically in Standard, I think there's a lot of ways to deal with this that are very commonly played. So I hate to say it, but I don't love the card right this moment. But that's the definition of a sleeper, a card that has to wait for other cards to rotate. So Skycrier is up next. I think the card is interesting, but obviously not... very good. They do give you 2 keyword abilities, which is cool, but I can't really give the card more than like a 1.75 or something. Speakeasy Server is not good. This is kind of a trap. I think Timmies and casual players and newer players really love to gain life a lot, and they overvalue stuff like this. Don't do it. In Sealed or Draft or whatever, it's a 5-mana 3/3 flyer. Not great stat line, but it's still a flyer, right? So you could do worse than a Splashable. It's only 1 colored pip in the casting cost. Splashability makes for a lot in this set, in limited at least, but in Standard the card's bad. Don't play it. No, it's like a 1.25. Swoop and Protector might be better than it looks, but 4 mana is probably just too much to pay for this body. Even with the flash, even with the flying, even with the shield counter. I think there's a blue-white tempo deck in Standard, but for 4 mana, I think it wants to do way better stuff than this. So I'm just going to give it like a 1.75. But now we're in blue. That means I get to take a sip of the drink, look at chat, see what you guys are talking about. And let's get into blue. Starting with a card that I think some people actually really like. This is All-Seeing Arbiter, and this does do a lot when it ETBs. It's just so much, but it's still 6 mana. It's not great. I want to like this card more than I do, but I don't trust it for 6 mana. And the second ability is a little ho-hum, but it's okay. It's fine. It's a fine ability. But really, the good thing about this is draw a 2, discard. But we already have like Master of Winds for 4 mana. Like nobody plays that card. And so I really don't see this seeing too much play. I'll give it like a 2.25. It's, again, in a vacuum, the card looks powerful, but I just don't think it's going to find a home. The Backstreet Boy, Backstreet Bruiser right here. Just one of these 2-mana 3/3s, but this one's actually easier to get going than a lot of the 2-mana 3/3s that we've seen recently. I still don't think the card's good, though. I'll give it like a 1.5. Broker's Vet is up next. This is good to sacrifice to a thing and then put a shield counter on an important creature. I still think you could get blown out doing that, but, you know. You sacrifice this to a Deadly Dispute. Draw 2, make a treasure, put a shield counter on an important guy. It seems good, but I still don't think the card is quite good enough to see too much standard play, even in like sacrificey kind of decks with all the other options we have right now. So I want to like this card. I do like it in sealed, but as far as standard goes, I think I just have to give it like a 2, you know, something like that. But up next is Case the Joint. Boy, do we have better ways of drawing 2 for 4 mana right now. But this is the common level, you know, draw 2 for 4 spell of the set. This one's kind of neat because you get to see what your opponent's up to and all that, especially if they just scribe to the top. Like, what is that? But there's better ways to spend 4 mana on 2 cards right now. I'll give it like I'll get a 2, something like that. Cut Your Losses is bad. I've talked about how much I don't like this card before. Don't be mistaken. Don't be a rube. Don't be a Mark, you know, this card. Sorry to any people named Mark out there. I mean, don't be like a Mark. I didn't really explain it much, but anyway, I'm losing speedrun time here. This card can never kill your opponent in one shot. I think some people are going to think like, oh, if you casualty that copies it, it just takes out their whole library. No, it takes out half their library, and then it takes out half of that. It just never kills them. It costs way too much mana, and you come down on board presence. Just, boy, I don't like this card. I'm going to give it like a 1. I really don't like Cut Your Losses. Disdainful Stroke is a good card. Let's give Disdainful Stroke a 3. I think that's about where we want to be on that. Echo Inspector is not great, but these ETB Connive guys are probably okay. But in standard, nah, casting cost is ridiculous for this effect. You could get a Seeker's Chariot for this effect. For this mana, at least. And you Echo Inspector instead, probably a fool's game. I'll give it a 1.25. Well, 1.5. We'll give it a 1.5. It's got a cool ETB ability. Errant Street Artist. I don't know what the hell you do with this. I have no idea what you're doing with this. I think that you copy copies, right? So let's say you casualty something, and you get the normal spell and the copy, and then you use Errant to make a copy of the copy, and that's super cool. In like Brawl and Commander, it might be fun to do stuff with this. I don't think this is a standard card. I could be wrong. I think this is one of those that like it is one of the most likely cards in the set that like all of us content creators who are just kind of passing over the card and saying what I just said, right? Like, oh, it's a commander card. We might be like super wrong and there's something super broken you can do with this and it's unbelievable. It's just 1 mana to get in play and it enables the grossest stuff, you know? You can even flash it into play and immediately use it on later turns. Like this card feels pushed and like maybe there's a thing we're supposed to be doing with it, but right now just my gut feeling is that the card is mostly a really interesting commander. So I'm just going to give it like a 2.75, but that's a pretty good score. It gives it lots of room to improve. Even the score, by the way, speaking of good scores, is next. And people have gotten on to me for liking this card. And I even had one person do this whole comment on the Sleepers video that Sphinx's Revelation would be a bad card in the current standard. And they are smoking something that I would really like to smoke. Maybe I wouldn't, because makes you have silly opinions. Sphinx's Revelation would be a very, very good card in the current standard. I hate to tell you that control is a deck, you know? Like, not even just blue-white control even, but just like, you know, a lot of games go to turn 15 right now instead. You know, like Esper control, Orzhov mid-range, like these are the 2 best decks in standard, and they routinely go to like turn 12, so I don't know how you could have the opinion that Sphinx's Rev would not be a desirable card in standard right now. I don't. So I think that even the score is pretty good. It doesn't gain you the life, but and it's a little harder to cast technically than Rev. But I still think that this has the potential to be a pretty decent card in standard. I can't really score it higher than about a 2.5 right now, right? But that's a lot of room for improvement. The card could be as high as a 3. I want to have a lot more faith in this than I do, but you can tell I've got some faith. So I like this card. I like it more than probably 92% of the people that have read the card. But I think there's something to it. I do. But you guys remember when Gadwick was a card like 2 years ago? You remember? That was exactly his casting cost. You remember that? Remember? 3 blue and X for draw X cards on a 3/3. This card trades the body for instant speed. And Gadwick saw enough play to be about a 2.5, didn't he? So, I think I'm about on base with this, But anyway, Expendable Lackey is up next. I like this card more than I should, but I still can't really rate this more than like a 1.75. I've said this before, but it's not Narc Amoeba as much as I want it to be. But I really like stuff that you can kind of play out of your graveyard, in air quotes. So I like this card. Probably going to do something janky with it on stream or something, but like it's not great. 1.75 for interest points. But Fairy Vandal is up next. And yeah, Gabwick did tap things down, but that's, and you would, it's true, you would use that ability, you would. But Fairy Vandal is up next. I've always liked Fairy Vandal. In a set with Connive, I think it's probably pretty good. But I do think this could be an important piece for the mono blue tempo decks, the blue-white tempo decks. I've been looking for a decent threat at a low cost. They can play with Flash. That's very important, right? And even though those decks right now don't draw all the cards in the world, I think with Fairy Vandal, it's like, did you really need an excuse to put Consider in your deck? You know what I mean? Like, did you really need that much of an excuse to play that card, or like other things that draw cards? So I think Fairy Vandal might actually have, just like it had last time it was in Standard, some life, Not the most important card in its Fringe deck, but the Fringe deck is very good, even if it only has one use. The Fringe deck is very good, and it's an important card in that deck, although not the best. So I got to give Fairy Vandal like a 2.5. It's been a fine card in the past. Could be again. Hypnotic Grifter is probably a cool card in Sealed. I meant to bring this card up in the pre-release guide too, but really only gave myself like 3 cards per. But it's still a fun card there. But even with a cool mana sink like this on your 1-drop, I don't think it's very standard playable. But a cool card. I'll still give it like a 1.75. Ledger Shredder is up next. Probably my favorite joke that I've made on the channel in a while. It's a joke about this card in the Sleepers video, I guess. But this card looks awesome to me. I can't rate it super highly, but I will give it a 3. I think it's solid. Again, for reanimation decks and stuff like that. But just for churning and getting bigger, it's kind of like a Tarmogoyf that draws cards. It's just 2 mana for a flyer that starts with decent toughness. If you connive with it twice, which shouldn't be super hard to do, then suddenly it's a 3-power guy. A lot of people in the Sleepers video were pointing out, because I didn't, that it's not just when you cast your second spell, it's when anybody casts their second spell. It punishes your opponents for doing that. That's very good. So I'll give this card a solid 3. I think it's a fine Magic card. A Little Chat is not a very great looking Magic card in a format with Deadly Dispute, where I think that the treasure token Dispute gives you is just better in a lot of ways. But if you would rather combo than ramp, or I guess if you're in like a, monocolored or perhaps 2-color deck, this might be more desirable than something that fixes your mana. Or, one more thing, the decks that play Deadly Dispute often play like Lolth and stuff like that, so they're trying to ramp into 5 drops. So it's good to play Deadly Dispute to give you that treasure token to ramp. This, if you have a deck that's a little bit more lightweight, plays a lot of, 2 and 3 drops, that's kind of curve stops at 3. In a deck like that, a Little Chat might be a little bit better too. Because you don't need the mana as much, and you'd rather see more cards, because most of your cards cost 2 and 3 mana. You want to get the most powerful of those 2 and 3 mana cards that you can. So seeing more cards is probably just better in a deck like that. Again, also in combo decks where you need to see more cards, this might be better. But again, that depends on how many colors you're playing, if you're playing 5 and 6 drops, so you want the ramp. So I don't know. Compared to a card like Deadly Dispute, which I think you have to do, I don't love this, but in a vacuum, I still have to give the card like a 2.25. I think it's a fine Magic card. Honestly, 2.5. We'll give it a 2.5. I think it's fine. Whereas Deadly Dispute is more of a 3. I think the treasure is just better in most situations, but seeing more cards is great. It really is. But that's only if you casualty. If you don't casualty, it's not a very good card at all. Majestic Metamorphosis is 3 mana. And it's bad. I was about to read the card. Even with the cantrip, the card's not good. Don't play it. It's a 1. Make Disappear might be my favorite blue card, or at least possibly the best blue card in the set. This is an unconditional counterspell on turn 2. Fear it. It's like Quench was an important card in its format, and I don't know if this is better than Quench, but it can be better than Quench later in the game. So I think this is a ridiculous card, guys. I really do. Fear, Make Disappear. I will give this card a 3.25. That's a very good score, especially compared to some of the other scores we've given out so far. But I do think this might be literally one of the most standard, impactful cards from the entire set. Make Disappear is Very good. For better or worse, it's a very good Magic card. Obscure Initiate is not good. Give this card like a 1 1/4. An offer you can't refuse. I have seen so many people online discuss this card and be like, oh, it's just a bad negate. It's so bad, it's a bad negate. And it's like, they don't ever discuss the fact that you can counter your own spells and ramp with it, which is what I want to do, right? Like, I just want to cast like a 1 mana spell with this, negate my own spell and get 2 treasure tokens on turn 2, and then play a land on turn 3 and have 5 mana and like mono blue. That seems really a decent use for the card. But like, if you don't do that, then like later on in the game, when you both have like 10 mana, then you can counter like the game-winning spell, and you don't care that they have 2 extra mana now, right? Because everybody has all the mana they'll ever need anyway. So, I think this card has like 2 very specific uses for very specific points in the game. I like this card, but I think it might be a trap, right? I think you should probably refuse the offer, but I'm still going to be trying to do it on stream. But I'll give the card like a 2.5. It's still a counterspell. Still a fine counterspell. And in these decks that, these tempo decks, blue-white, mono-blue, all that, the difference between this and a negate is actually considerable, right? Like, you want to consider it when building the mono-blue tempo deck. The difference between 1 and 2 mana is astronomical. In a deck like tempo that's trying to, win the game on like turn 4 or 5, basically, but it's got to strain all of its mana, over the course of that game. It's only going to have really access to 6 like total mana, right? Like turn 1 mana, turn 2 mana, turn 3 mana. That's 6 total mana right there. And then turn 4 mana at the most, but you probably won't play a land because in your tempo deck you're playing like 21 lands, 22 lands. So you probably top out at like 2 or 3 lands, and you know what I mean. Like, over the course of most tempo games, you're only going to have access to a very specific small amount of mana. Difference between 1 and 2 mana is huge. You want to cram as much value as you can into every turn and use your mana as efficiently as possible. So, if you counter their sweeper, and give them 2 treasure tokens, it kind of doesn't matter because you win next turn in your tempo deck, right? So I could see that deck playing this card. I'll give it a 2.5. Out of the way is, your standard, like, sideboard sort of removal spell that's just kind of fine. It's an Into the Royal you don't have to kick if you target a green spell. Or a green permanent. So I'll give this card like a 2. Sonic Snoop, I don't even with the ETB flat, or even with the ETB connive and flash, right? Like, if you think about it this way, Spirited Companion, Dusk Legion Zealot, Elvis Visionary, right? These are all 2 mana, draw a card when they come into play things. And they've all seen a fair amount of play over the time. This is more, I guess, of a Phyrexian Rager. Phyrexian Rager was 3 mana for like a 2/2 or a 2/1. I think it was a 2/2. Into the battlefield, pay life, draw a card. Right. So this is more akin to something like that. And honestly, it might be better than I'm grading it here because, 3 mana, loot at instant speed, decent blocking body, maybe block a 2-power creature with flash and like connive when an ETBs. Like, I don't know, I could see it working. But I for some reason cannot bring myself to like this card. And obviously I think it's just kind of a, fine, limited playable, 23rd card, fill your curve and all that stuff. Works in your connive deck. But in standard, 1.5, something like that. Psychic Pickpocket I also don't like, even with the ETB. Connive and ETB, affect the board. It's the 5 mana is not good for standard, especially at that power toughness. So the card's like a 1.25. Public Enemy is neat. You can use it in a couple of ways, but it's really gimmicky, and I'm just going to give this card a 1. I don't like it. Reservoir Kraken almost made the sleepers list. Almost did. A 4 mana 6/6 trample ward 2 is pretty cool, and even if it doesn't get to attack, then it still gets to make a 1/1. And you don't have to attack with the 1/1 either. You can just leave the 1/1 up to block, whatever. So, I think this card's neat, but just, the next in a long line of large creatures with a little slightly too much of a downside. Even this is probably slightly too much of a downside. So I really want to like this like so much, but I'm just going to give it like a 2 1/4. I think it's probably near that level when I really wish it was a 3, but it's not. Rooftop Nuisance is not great. I want to like this too. I like the sort of freeze effects, but especially at sorcery speed, it's just like balls. It's not a good card. Let's give it like a 1.25. Run Out of Town is not super great, even though these like time ebb kind of effects can be great and limited. So, keep it in mind there. But for 4 mana, even at instant speed, you don't want it in standard. Let's give it a 1 1/4. Security Bypass is not Curiosity, but I'm still curious about it. This isn't a terrible card. Sucks that you have to attack alone with the creature, but that should be okay in a lot of situations. Unblockability plus looting and making the creature bigger. And remember, creature's getting bigger and it's unblockable. So like, if you can protect the guy, might be okay. And this might be decent, again, in these target me kind of decks, right? They play Illuminator Virtuoso and the draw card Drake and all that, where you're only playing like 12 to 16 creatures in your entire deck. So if a creature has to attack alone, that's fine. You don't care that much, right? And that creature is getting bigger every turn, and you're drawing into protection spells and stuff like that. So I could possibly see it there. So I want to give this card like a 2.5 or a 2.75 even. I think the card is kind of good, but probably not good enough. Sewer Crocodile. I actually really like this in Sealed. I think this looks really, really cool in Sealed, and I almost pointed it out in the pre-release guide, but obviously don't play this in Standard. It's not very good. It's a 1. Sleep with the Fishes. Cool little removal spell, but still 4 mana for a removal spell is not where you want to be in Standard. It's like a 1.25. Slip Out the Back is a fantastic card. If there's one perfect card for the blue-based tempo decks in the format in this set, it's this card. And you get cool art, you just say Slip Out the Back, Jack, and all that. So just a probably one of the better lower rarity blue cards, all things considered. And I'm going to give this a 2.75. I think it's up there with like Snakeskin Veil, right? It's in that territory. That's a very good Magic card. Undercover Cooperative, or Operative, rather, is a clone effect. I tend to not rate these super highly, but there are some players who live and die by these, like love these cards. So I apologize for offending you, but I've just never... It's not that I don't care about clone effects. It's just that I don't pay enough attention to them. And entering is with a shield counter as a copy of an important creature could be very good. But, we've seen these come and go for 4 mana lots and lots. And at this point, I think I have to gauge it as like a 2.25. Something like that. But, it's got something good enough to copy. It's going to be good. It's also kind of worth noting that you can copy a legendary creature, get rid of the legendary creature, and then keep the shield counter on this. So that's kind of neat. But Wing Shield Agent is sealed only, really, or draft only, limited. So let's give this card a 1.25 and move on. Wiretapping is too expensive. I want to like this card, but 5 mana is too much for your one-sided Howling Minds. Even though it gives you a lot of cards, it gives you the Hideaway card and extra card every turn, it's still probably not where you want it to be. Once the card is on the battlefield, it's powerful, but it's probably just like a 2, Witness Protection is a neat card. This is actually pseudo blue removal that takes all the abilities off the creature, that loses its name. That's something we haven't seen too many times before, and it's only 1 mana, so you could compare this to a Frogify or a Pongify or something like that. Favorably, I think just 1 mana is a really good rate for this, so I'm going to actually give this like a 2.5. I mean, it's a fine card, even though it will probably never actually see Standard play. I think this is, again, one of those cards that could see play in these mono blue or blue white tempo decks where most of your creatures fly anyway. So this is effectively just removal for 1 mana, right? It's not Swords to Plowshares, but it's getting there. But we are at black now. That is all the blue cards. So let's pause for just a moment. We'll take a sip. We'll look at chat. We'll get back on it. Let's get into the black cards with Angel of Suffering here. It's 5 mana for a 5/3 flyer, so it's probably not good, right? The 3 toughness really sucks, but look at the rest of that text box. I mean, it's not Platinum Angel, but I'll take it. I want to play this in Standard, but I fear that it's probably not. You got Lolth at 5 mana. It probably actually helps you win the game better than this does. So I will say there are various self-mill decks that I've been wanting to be to be good decks. And this is a neat little card for them because you can play it for 5 mana, and it's like a win condition. You can reanimate it with all the reanimation pieces those decks tend to play. And once it's in play, it can help mill you to better reanimation stuff, or better, Diregraph Harvest, or like whatever weird garbage you're trying to do. It can help you do that by milling you. This reminds me a little bit of Doom Whisperer back in the day, and I don't think I've made that comparison yet because it just hit me. But Doom Whisperer is like a 5 mana 6/6. You pay 2 life and Surveil 2 or something like that, so you can dump cards in your yard. This kind of feels the same. You're not paying life to Surveil, but you, rather than be having damage dealt to you, you instead mill. So it's kind of very similar to me. And that card saw a lot of play, but that was mostly on the strength of being a 5 mana 6/6 flyer. with an incidental Surveil ability tacked on, you can do cool stuff with. This I'm not as sure about, but I will give it a straight 3. I know that's a pretty high score, but I really like the card, and I think that there's a meta where the card could be playable, but I don't think it's this one. But I'll still give it like a 2.75. I think it's probably the better score. I really want to lean towards 3. Body Launderer is next. A lot of people really like this card, and I can see why. You know, the death touch is some gravy. It connives whenever a thing dies, and also when it dies, you get something back from your graveyard. So there's a lot of value on the card. I'm still not sure that it's worth 4 mana. All things considered, with all the stuff, like in mono black, for instance, or black white, you can play Sorin for 4 mana rather than play this, and I think that's probably better. I do like the dies triggers. I really, really do, and I'll probably be playing this card on stream, but, you know, Buff Gomez. He looks like Gomez from the Addams Family to me, but just, like, huge. Probably, I hate to say it, but I don't know how much standard play it sees, but there's enough value on the card that it's probably good enough. That said, you know, Vanishing Verse format, no. But it plays pretty well against a, like a Meat Hook Masker or something like that. So, you know, I could see it seeing some play, but at the end of the day, I kind of more doubt it than believe in it. So I'm going to give the card another kind of solid 2.75 the way I did Angel. I really like it. I want it to see play, but if I'm being realistic, if I'm being as spiky as I should be for this kind of exercise, probably not. Cemetery Tampering is such a bad Magic card. Somebody asked if this was going to be my favorite card of the day one time, and I was like, no. It is a delicious milkshake. If you want to bring your boys to the yard, it does that. And it gives you 3 cards every turn to you know, fuel your graveyard strats, and that goes really well with a couple of things in Standard right now. I forgot his name, but like the 3 mana 6/6 legend guy that's also a 1 mana artifact on the other side that mills you. That dude. Probably plays kind of well with that, but just you don't want to pay 3 mana for this and like literally do nothing, and it doesn't affect the board state, doesn't really affect the game state in any meaningful way for a couple of turns. So I just don't think that Cemetery Tampering is very good, but you'll see this on stream. This is a centerpiece in plenty of self-mill decks, I'm sure. So you'll see it there, but I really don't think the card is better than like literally a 2. I really don't. Corrupt Court Official, I thought was just as good as like an Elderfang Disciple, but I think somebody pointed out to me that Elderfang Disciple is like each opponent or something. It's like even worse than those, but it's still, you know, what do you rate an Elderfang Disciple or a Burglar Rat or a Vile Beetle or whatever that's called, or an Acquisitions Expert? Like, what is the rating for that card? That's probably like a 2 1/4, right? Like playable in certain decks, but not all decks. It's a key player in the decks, but not the best card in the deck. So, you know, fine, 2 1/4. Crooked Custodian is next. Card's not good. Move on. It's a 1. Cut Up the Prophets. I want to like this card. Very versatile. There's a large spread of playability on the card. It scales well. That's the word I'm looking for. It scales well. But I really don't know how many points in the game you want to cast this card. I really don't. 3 mana, 3 life, or excuse me, 5 mana, 3 life for 3 cards at sorcery speed. And like you can casualty, but you still have to like pay more life. I don't know. This card screams like I look terrible, but I'm actually niche playable in one specific deck to draw a bunch of cards in like a combo deck, you know what I mean? But I still don't love it. I'm going to give it like a 1.75. Cutthroat Contender I rather like, actually. This is just a sort of, if you squint, it's a Savannah Alliance, right? In black, and it's a vampire too, and a warrior. There's like no 1-drop warriors in black, so that's kind of important, I guess. I mean, if you want to build warriors. So I like this. I actually kind of really like this guy. But again, here's the question: what do you rate Savannah Lions? What's that rating? Especially when you have to pay life for your Savannah Lions. But the trade-off is, unlike some of the other 1 mana 2/1s, this has really relevant creature types. I guess Vampires already has a 1 mana 2/1, but now it has 2 of them. And that's probably what it wanted to go underneath. So all things considered, I'm obviously talking to myself about this card. But I have to give it like a 2.5, you know, like it's fine. 2.75 at the most, but probably more closer to 2.5. I just think it's a fine little aggro dude that's going to end up seeing play here and there, maybe. Deal Gone Bad is not good. A 1.5. Still a removal spell. It still mills. I'll still probably play it in self-mill decks because I've wanted a removal spell that mills me. I've like not named Witherbloom Command. You have to pay 2 whole more mana than a Witherbloom Command to get that extra 2 toughness. It sucks, but we'll play it in the self-mill decks, but it won't be good and we won't feel good about it. And it's like a 1.5. Demon's Due is up next. I actually like this. Behold the Multiverse, right? But it's black, so you have to pay the 2 life. Still, though, could be worse. 1.75, somewhere like that. Dig Up the Body is next. This could be neat if you casualty, but even then, the best thing about the card is the instant speed, which you don't often see raised dead effects at instant speed. So being able to get 2 creatures back to your hand from your yard at the end of your opponent's turn or something is probably okay. You can also just block with one of your creatures during your opponent's turn, sack that guy that blocked, and get 2 guys back, you know. So I think this is actually kind of neat, but still not really on the level. I'll give it like a 2.25. Dusk Mango's up next. I hate this card. I really don't like this card. You're already paying 7 mana, and then you have to do more things. You know, sure, it does all these things to your opponent. So it might be like a neat reanimation target. We'll have to try that out, but that's about the ceiling on the card. I really don't love this. I'll give it, outside of Budget Reanimator, you just don't play it. So I guess if you do reanimate it, you don't have to pay any of these extra costs. And your opponent sacks a creature, discards, and loses 4. I don't know. I should like this more than I do as a reanimator spell, or as a reanimator target. But there's probably just better targets. So screw it. I don't know. I'll give it a 1.75. Extract the Truth is up next. This is a good card. This is a really good card. Let's give this a 2.75. Yeah, I was going to say 3. No, let's give it a 2.75. Kind of a bread and butter kind of card that might be comparable to like Check for Traps. We've seen Check for Traps see a little bit more play lately. And Extract the Truth might be better than Check for Traps in this environment. So we'll see. Fake Your Own Death. I really like these effects for 1 mana. Don't so much like them for 2 mana. I'll give it a 1. Girder Goons is not good. I'll give it a 1. Graveyard Shift. Interesting little reanimation spell here that you can flash in. That might be interesting for Solar Flare decks. You know, these Control Reanimator hybrids. Really interested to play it there, especially now that we have this and Port of Carfel. So we have 2 different sort of instant speed reanimator effects that we can play in our deck, and that's neat. But I still don't think the card is very good, all things considered. I'll give it a 2. Grizzly Sigil. I really want to like this. I just, for some reason, this reminds me of a card that would have been bad in, like, Mirage. You know what I mean? So I'll give this card, like, even though, you know, it's only 1 mana, it allows you to sacrifice a creature, and yeah, I said allow. You can turn that into an upside really quick. So, like, it might not be the worst thing in the world. But I'm still just going to give this, I got 1.5. Illicit Shipment is up next. This is neat in that it's a tutor that gets you 2 cards. There's not a whole lot of that. So in a very specific combo deck that can get value off of sacrificing the 3-power guy, like maybe. But 5 mana is a lot. 5 mana is so much for a tutor. You tap down on turn 5, you tap out, and you don't even affect the board state. It kind of doesn't matter that you went and got 2 cards. You can still die from doing that. So I think that this is probably a bit of a trap, but it's at least kind of cool to think about. So I'll give the card a 1.75. Incriminate is my least favorite edict effect they've ever printed. I do not like this card. I really want to, I just don't. At least you get to choose the 2 creatures that they are to choose from. So they can't just sack a 1/1 or something. So that's kind of good, but I still want to like this, but it's still fine edict effect, kind of playable removal. So I'll give it a 1.5. Join the Maestros is bad. It's not a good card. It looks like it's 5 mana for 8 power, but it's really kind of 5 mana for 6 power because you have to come down on 2 power to play it in the first place. So, you know, I give this card like a 1.25. Maestros Initiate is up next. I want to like this, but that activated ability is just ridiculously expensive. I think this too is a trap for people that want to build like Reanimator, self-mill decks and stuff. It's the burp. The ability is a little bit too expensive, so I'll just give this card a 1.25. Midnight Assassin. I'm actually really interested to try this out in the Finn the Fangbearer decks, where now we have Vampire Nighthawk, or Vampire, whatever it's called. We have the Vampire Nighthawk, Nighthawk Scavenger, that's it. And we have this. So we have 2 3-mana flyers in the Finn deck that have Death Touch. And I think that's actually kind of interesting, you know. This is just more likely to get through and put the poison counters on your opponent. And in the green-black poison deck, it's much easier to cast even than a Nighthawk Scavenger. So I want to try it there, but I don't think that it makes that deck any better than it already was. Not really. So I'm just going to give this card like a 1.75, something like that. 2 at the most, because it might be playable in that one deck, and even then, it's not making the Finn deck top tier. Murder is up next. Just good old Murder. What do you give Murder? I give Murder a 2. I think it's a solid, very solid removal spell. Nightclubber is sick, dude. Nightclubber is so good. Nightclubber, I'm going to give a 2.5. I think that 2.5 is about right. It's probably just a sideboard card, but it's going to absolutely wreck tokens decks. Like, make no mistake, I think this actually has a relatively large effect on best of 3 standard. Maybe not best of 1 so much, but there are so many tokens based decks already, and this set has a token theme, thus increasing the tokens even more. And this card can basically be a safety valve against all of that. It's not a Meat Hook Massacre or anything, but I do think it might be a somewhat important sideboard card. The only thing that makes me think it might not be is that a lot of the tokens decks play Wedding Announcement. Once your opponent flips a Wedding Announcement into an Anthem effect, Nightclubber is kind of useless feeling, right? So maybe it's not as good as I want it to be, but as a sideboard card, it does look good against specific decks. That might be good to have some valves against. But Rafine's Silencer is next. I love this card in Sealed and Draft and stuff, but we have to think about it for standard play. Again, it's like a Phyrexian Rager, a 3 mana, draw a card when it enters the battlefield. But you got to come down a card. It's not just card advantage or whatever. You still have to come down a card. But when it dies, you can take out X1s or even X2s, depending on what you discarded. So I actually think this card is like right on the cusp of standard playability, sort of budget standard playable. ETB triggers and a dies trigger. Cards like that are some cards you need to pay attention to. ETB trigger and a dies trigger, usually very, very good. I'm not sure you're getting all the value you want on this, but still interesting to think about in standard, but I can't really give it more than like a 2, right? Revel Ruiner is next. This card's not great. This is 4 mana ETB connives are very attractive to me, at least. So 3 mana and 4 mana, there's a huge difference between those two things. So Revel Ruin, I'll just give like a 1.25. It did kind of ruin our good time here. Rogue's Gallery is going to pick it back up. I really should have put this in the Sleepers video instead of maybe Riveteer's Decoy. There's a couple of cards like that we'll talk about in this video that I think might be sleepers in the set that aren't in the Sleepers video. And this is one of them. This can draw 5 cards out of your graveyard, right? 3 mana, sorcery speed or whatever, but still. This, in the right deck, probably draws at least 3 cards out of your graveyard. And like, 3 mana for 3 cards is really good. So, I think this might actually be like way better than it looks when enabled. But I wouldn't go out of my way to enable it. But if there is some sort of like 4 or 5 color deck with creatures that also plays creatures that are also multicolored, you know what I mean? They don't have to be multicolored, but if you have cards with like hybrid mana costs or something, that's probably the best way to take advantage of a card like this. I could actually see ways of playing this in a deck that is effectively 2 or 3 colors, but the way they've done hybrid mana cost, you can actually draw like 4 cards out of your graveyard with this. So like, I like Rogue's Gallery. I'm going to give it a 2.5. Yeah. 2.25. Let's give it a 2.25. Sanguine Spy is up next. This is another card I do not like, but it's right up my alley, isn't it? This card looks like I should love it forever, but I don't. I think it's a little bit expensive to get on the battlefield. I don't love the stats for the mana cost. I don't love that you have to pay mana to sacrifice creatures. There's a lot that I want to like more about this. I hate that once you do fulfill the outrageous stipulation of having 5 different mana values in your graveyard, you still have to pay 2 life to draw cards at EOT. That's very stupid. So like, I wanna like this, and I do like the value that it provides. I just think that it does so for a little bit steep in terms of the various costs involved in the card. So I'm still going to give this, though, like a 2.5. I think that it's playable in very specific decks, but even in the decks where it looks like you should play it, it's just not like a Woe Strider, right? It's not as good as a card like that, so I want it to be better than I think it actually is. Shadow of Mortality is up next. I don't like this. I know that people love it, especially in the modern deck that, like, do you sacrifice a creature or something? I forget exactly what the name of the stinking card is, but it's like, discard a card, or like it's like the first card on top of your library, something like that. You deal damage equal to its casting cost. It's the card. Yeah, look at the top card of your library. Deal damage equal to its casting cost. That's the card I'm thinking of. And people have been talking about Shadow Mortality with that. So that's a meme, obviously. Unless it's the best deck in Modern, I don't know. But who knows? But I don't like this card very much. Just a vanilla, 7/7. So even if you can get down to 7 life and play it for like 2 mana, it's still, I don't know, that's not terrible. It could be better. I'm still gonna give this though like I'm just gonna give it like a 2.5. That's probably even higher than I want to rate it though, because I think most game it's just gonna sit in your hand. And even when you do get to play it, it's like, okay, vanilla 7/7. Okay, who cares? So I'd rather play Shakedown Heavy. I think it's the better card. 3 mana for a 6/4 menace. That there's like, I don't have to wait half the game to play. You know, it's probably better. It draws you cards and stuff. Heavy actually looks like a really good Magic card. Also, Crew's Colossal Plow. Keep that in mind. But that all memes aside, the card is just kind of in a vacuum very, very good. So I'm going to give Shakedown Heavy a 3.25. That's the highest score we've seen in a good while, isn't it? But I think it's that good. Tavern Swindler's up next. I hate cards like this. I don't like flipping coins. People love flipping coins. I ain't one of them. Not really. So I'm just going to give this card a 1. Don't play that card. Tenacious Underdog. One of my favorite black cards in the whole set. I'm going to give Underdog like a 3. Yeah, I think Underdog's a 3. We'll give it a 3, guys. I think that's about right. I love this card a lot. I think it's going to really pick up mono black aggro. I can't wait to try it out. But Vampire Scrivener's up next. This card's actually tempting when you look at the text box and you see that it's 5 mana and you're like, ugh. So let's give this card a 1.5. Whack is up next, and this card is not completely whack. I think once Ray of Enfeeblement rotates out of the format, this would just be the sort of de facto against mono white aggro sideboard card. So I have to give it at least a 2 and a quarter, something like that. But, right now it's not the best removal spell. But that's all of Black. Black did not take very long. Is Black underpowered in this set? Let's talk amongst ourselves. Let's get into the red cards here. I don't think I have to hit the cough button. I think I can just launch into it. Let's look at Antagonize next. I sort of like it. I do. For 2 mana in an aggro deck, this is about the biggest boost that you can find, right? It's like I forget what it was called, Titanic Growth, the green card with the giant squirrel on it that people used to play. It's like 2 mana for 4/4, +4/+4 till EOT. And in just the right aggro deck, I could see this seeing play, although I think Ironhoof Boar is better if you want an ability like this in your aggro deck, and that doesn't see any play. So I doubt this sees play, but honestly, 2 mana for +4 on an unblocked, 1 power guy. Sure, I'll take it. Maybe your opponent points a removal spell at your Fireblade Charger, Antagonize in response, and just hit something for 5. I don't know, could work. But altogether, it's probably not great. I got to score it, though, so I'll give it a 1.5. Arcane Bombardment is one of the bigger memes in the entire set. I think this card is probably Commander playable, right? If you're doing fun stuff. And you'll very likely see it on Mono Black Magic's channel and our streams for what that's worth. But Bombardment, I can't say that I love this card. I'm just going to give it a 1.75. If it costs 4 mana, I think we'd be in the money here, but as it is, 6 mana is way too much for this effect. It takes way too many turns to get going. We just can't do that in modern day standard constructed Magic. So if you can get the card rolling, it wins the game for you. But boy, is that an investment, and boy, is that a lot of time. So I'm just going to give it I'll stick closer to a 2. Big Score is amazing. This is just a better Unexpected Windfall, which already sees play. It's the exact same text box, just easier to cast. If Windfall is about a 2.75, I'm going to go ahead and give this a 3. That's a very high score, but Unexpected Windfall has been one of the more important sort of, not a key card in Is It or anything for a while here, but, I don't want to use the term linchpin because I don't think it's that important, but, even though it's not critical to the deck, it is a card that the deck sort of needs to get its treasure tokens to draw into more stuff and blah, blah. So I think Windfall is 2.5, 2.75 just by itself, maybe even more. So Big Score's got to be a 3 because it's just strictly better, even than Unexpected Windfall. Calling a Professional is not super great. It does deal damage to any target, and I think there might be reasons to play this in your mono red burn deck over an Igneous Inspiration. Even though the mono red burn decks that exist right now, they need as much sort of card advantage as they can. So you might still want to play Inspiration, but this has instant speed. Players can't gain life is actually pseudo important in a lot of situations in this standard. So Calling a Pro isn't terrible, but I'm still just going to give it a 1.75. Daring Escape is, just a better version of a card they printed a million times whose name escapes me right now. But usually you see, Kindled Fury, is that it? It's just 1 mana for +1/+0 and first strike till end of turn, but this one also scries. This is not a great combat trick. It's a 1. Devilish Valet, man. I like this guy so much, but I really can't in good conscience give him more than a 2.25, but he could be a huge sleeper in this set. Somebody brought up, speaking of this, we talked about this card earlier. Obviously, we're going to talk about every card in the set. But I said earlier that people have brought up a few things you can do with Rabble Rousing in my comments section. Rabble Rousing being the 5 mana white enchantment that creates a token for each attacking creature, right? Whenever you attack with a creature, you get a 1/1 token. So you attack with 3/4 guys with a Devilish Valet in play, suddenly he's a huge dude. So that's a cute little combo. Probably not good enough, but something we're going to be doing on stream, right? So that's fun. But I don't think that Valet is quite good enough for standard, although the haste and the trample makes me think they pushed him a little bit. But I don't want to give this more than a 2.25 or something like that. Thanks for the 1,000 bits, Recursive Intrigue. That's, wow. You're welcome. Thanks for the spoilers. I appreciate you. Thanks for the bits. Exhibition Magician is up next. This is my favorite name for a card in the whole set. It's even better than Professional Facebreaker. I just love saying the name of this card. Dang old Exhibition Magician. This card I actually really like a lot. It reminds me of, there is a black card, Callous Brood Mage, something like that. It's like 2 and a black for a 2/1, and when it ETBs, you get a pest token, or you get to draw a card and lose a life. And this card kind of reminds me of that. Being able to ramp when it ETBs is really good. Being able to make the token is kind of good sometimes, right? But obviously, Callous Blood Mage didn't see any play, and I doubt this will either. But I still think it's kind of a powerful card. Budget decks might want it. Decks that want to proc Alliance might want it. Decks that want to ramp might want it. I don't know. I kind of like it. So it's not like a Plundering Barbarian. I think that Plundering Barbarian is probably going to be better in a lot of situations. And that card doesn't see play. So, but I'm still going to give this like a solid 2 1/4. I think Exhibition Magician's like a really neat card. I like it for budget decks. Glittering Stockpile, I like this card. Did I say 2 1/4? Let's give Exhibition Magician a 2. Glittering Stockpile, I'll give a 2 1/4. Possibly even a 2.5. It's not better than Celestis, but it's better than a lot of other rocks. And if you just tap it twice, suddenly then you can sack it for a ton of mana. Like 2 mana is a lot to sack this for. And once you sack it for like 3 or 4, it's really good. But even just sacking it for 2 mana at a time, I think is like crazy good. So I like this card a good bit, but I really can't give it more than a 2 1/4. Gold Hound, subtly one of the best cards in the entire set. Gold Hound is not Lotus Petal, but it's probably about as close as we're going to get. Yes, you do have to wait to tap and sacrifice it. I've had this question a lot this season. It has Summoning Sickness. You have to wait to tap and sack it, obviously. And that kind of sucks. There's a lot of really cool like turn 2 plays we'd have access to if we could just sack Gold Hound. But you do have to wait a turn, but this is still turn 1 ramp that fixes mana. Not a Birds of Paradise, but it does have First Strike that takes out a ton of stuff. There's a lot of X1s in this format. You'd be surprised how many X1s there are in the format. And Menace, while not the best ability, it's another one. They threw another keyword ability on it. Why not, right? So this card is fantastic. I really honestly think this is one of the best cards in the set. And just for the tap sack for a mana of any color. I know people are going to say it's not Birds of Paradise. I've had so many people get so upset at me in the comments section, the spoiler season, for saying that like Treasure is ramp. But like, here, let me look at the camera. Treasure is ramp. What's wrong with you? Like I know it only lasts 1 turn, but like that's all you need. This is standard constructed Magic, baby. You go up by, 1 mana over your opponent on an earlier turn than them, and you win the game. Like I'm not saying that this just wins the game or anything, but being able to tap this on turn 2, even tap it and sack it, but just tap it on turn 2 and get a 3-drop is something we cannot do in standard any other way. So that makes the card very important just for that in and of itself. But the mana fixing's good. You can keep it around for a turn to block small creatures, and then maybe sack it on turn 3 to ramp up to a 4, even a 5-drop depending. So I just think Gold Hound, I could go on about it all night. I'm not going to. They missed the chance to call it Golden Retriever, yes. But I'm not going to go on about it all night. We are trying to keep our record low here. But one way or the other, I think this is one of the more impactful cards for standard play in the entire set. It's also playable in Pauper. I want to point that out. But here to talk about standard, and I haven't rated the card yet because I'm a coward. I will give this card a 3.5. I think it's that good. Horde Hauler, it's just generically good, right? It goes in a lot of different decks. I shouldn't have to justify this anymore. Gold Hound is a ridiculously good Magic card. Horde Hauler is stupid. It's a Horde Hauler. I think this might actually be very good a couple of sets from now. I almost put this on the sleepers list because it's the definition of a sleeper. When the Brothers War set comes out and there's a lot of artifact stuff going on, I think this card might be really, really sweet. So there's that. It might also force your opponent to prematurely sacrifice treasure tokens so that you don't get treasure tokens equal to the number of treasure tokens they have. Also, it's a 4-mana 5/5 trample, and as a vehicle that beats an Asika's Chariot, which could be, an important thing to remember. But all things considered, I don't think the card is super attractive for, game one in most cases. So I'm just going to give this like a 2.75. Decent card. Don't underestimate it. But Involuntary Employment is up next, the threatened effect of the set. I always tend to give these 1.75 or thereabouts. They're somewhat playable in sideboards. Getting a treasure token is pretty good too. So they're fine, but they usually don't see play outside of boards, and even then, sparingly. Jackhammer is up next. I want to compare this to a Bone Splitter, but it's just not. It costs double the amount to play and equip as a Bone Splitter, so it's just not that. It's just kind of a 1, not a great card. Jaxus, by the way, I kept misgendering Jaxus. That is obviously a she, and I kept saying, like, he's pretty good. Jaxus is a lady. If I had to guess, a few people hit me on it, and it certainly appears as though it is a lady, but we'll see. I haven't read any of the story yet, so I have no idea, but we're here to judge cards for standard play, rather than talk about flavor and stuff. This card I love. This card I absolutely am in love with. 100%, but it's hard to say that it's super standard playable. It really is. We'll have to wait and see. This is one of the most wait and see cards in the entire set. But God, I don't want to rate this one. I really don't want to rate this one because I have to give it a lower score than I want to. I'm going to give Jaxie a 2.5. I'm going to give Jaxus a 2.5. Although this card could be as high as a 3.25. It really could be. So, it could be. But I'm just, instead, because the card just, this is one of those I don't know cards. I've looked at this card over and over. I've thought about all the things you can do with it. And I still just don't know. It's really hard to judge this one. But I'll stick with 2.5 to be on the safe side. But this could actually be a very, very impactful card, Jaxus. But moving on to Light 'em Up, this is a good removal spell, both in limited and even in standard on occasion, depending on what you want to do. I think if there is a red-black deck that still wants to play Eye Twitch and Shambling Ghast and stuff, it's especially good with Shambling Ghast. You can take out a 3 toughness creature and a 2 toughness creature for 2 mana if you sack a Shambling Ghast. It's probably good. So even though I think there's probably better removal spells, and I'm not sure how much play this ultimately sees, with the right sacrifice outlets, or the right sacrifice targets rather, like things you sack, they probably could be a good card. It also has to have a meta where there's enough like small aggro creatures to see, game 1 play. And I don't know that we'll actually hit that meta while it's available to play. So it's tough to say, but it's a decent removal spell, and I'll give it a 1.75. Mayhem Patrol up next. Not a great looking Magic card, but it's probably, again, one of those curve fillers in limited, but in standard it's like a 1.25. Plasma Jockey is a name that I love. But I don't think it's amazing. I don't think it's bad, though, either. A creature can't block this turn when it ETBs. Those tend to be better than you might think in the average aggro deck. And this blitzes in for a low cost, too. So it might actually be kind of a sleeper pick for an aggro deck, but I doubt it. I really doubt it. At the end of the day, I'm going to give it a 2 solid. Professional Facebreaker, also a breaker. The other best name for a card, maybe ever, in this set. And, she reminds me of Louisa from Encanto. But this card is probably fine, but just fine. It reminds me of another in like the long line of like tireless trackers. You know what I mean? Like a red tireless tracker or something. Although it doesn't get bigger, but anything that creates treasure tokens and effectively draws cards, it's unbelievable. And think too of how many turns where you have had like 3 or 4 treasure tokens on the table. You don't have much to do with them. You draw this guy. You immediately throw her down, and suddenly you can draw like 3 or 4 cards, like for effectively free. That's really, really good. So I don't know. Facebreaker might be the truth. I could see this being, like kind of just the definition of solid in like a mono red or 2 or 3 color red, mid-range deck. So I'm going to give this like a solid 3.25. I think 3.25 is about where I want to be with this. Pugnacious Pugilist is next. As much as I like this in sealed, I obviously don't really care much for it in constructed play. 4 mana for 5 power and stats if you blitz it in, plus the drawn card is like okay, I guess. You could deal up to 6 damage for 4 and draw a card. Like, that could be better than I think, but I doubt it. I'm just going to give the card a 1.5. Pirate Sledge Arsonist. This is another thing that probably should have been on the sleepers list, right? I didn't even like see this card during spoiler season. I don't know why, but it does damage to any target. You go to the number of permanents you sacrifice, not creatures you've sacrificed. Doesn't deal damage to a planeswalker, player, creature, whatever. Just any target. You can go face, you can blow a creature up, whatever. And that's really good. You sacrifice like 3 treasures in a turn. Maybe you pop an Evolving Wild style land. Maybe you sacrifice a creature to a Deadly Dispute or something, all in one turn, and suddenly you can hit for like 4, 4 or 5. So I'm telling you, it doesn't look too bad, in a deck with like Body Dropper and a couple of other sacrifice-centric things. You're growing your Body Dropper. You're making it to where Sledge Arsonist can do like 2 damage a turn or something, but on some turns he can go all the way up to like 5 damage depending on how many treasure tokens you have. I don't know. I don't think it's a good card, but I'm still like thinking about it. I'm thinking about it a lot since I did notice it. So it's caught my eye. I don't think it's great, but in the right kind of sacrifice deck, this is probably a signpost uncommon for sacrificial decks in limited, right? But in the right kind of sacrifice deck, this could be effectively a win condition in some ways. So I've got my eye on it, but I can't really give it more than like a 2.5. Ready to Rumble is next. Not a great card. Sorcery speed removal at 5 mana. Don't do it. It's a 1.25. Riveter's Initiate is next. That's, again, not super great. Probably don't do this card. 1.25. Riveteer's Requisitioner is at least interesting to think about. It's kind of a neat card, but I really don't want to give this more than about a 1.75. But I wouldn't be surprised if this showed up occasionally, especially later on in its life. Rob the Archives is a cool looking card. It's not quite better than some of the other cards like it. Because, it's not until the end of your next turn. It's just this turn you play those cards. But I think it's pretty cool. 2 cards for, 2 mana. And if you do casual, you effectively get to look at 4 cards. But are you really going to have all the mana to cast, double spell after you cast this? Who knows? So I want to like this card, but I actually think it's a bit trappy in some ways. I think you just play it for 2 mana and it's fine. You have the option to casualty. It's actually one of the better casualty cards in that way. So you can cast it without casualtying it, and it's still good. But that said, I don't like it more than I like some of the other options we have for cards like this right now. So I'm just going to give it like a 2, Sizzling Soloist is not a very good card. I'm fairly certain this isn't great. The best thing about this, though, is if you do have it and some creatures in your hand, you can maybe make some tokens, like -3 Loth, put the 2 spiders into play, and then suddenly like 2 of your opponent's guys can't block this turn. That seems okay, but I still don't think this card is very good. This card's a bit of a trap. Don't do it. It even can like provoke your opponent's creatures, but it's also not super great. So this card honestly like has a weird text box, like a 1998 text box, a Homeland's text box in some ways, but multiple creatures a turn can't block if you have the creatures to play is better than it looks, but it's not worth 4 mana. Don't play the card. 1.25. Sticky Fingers. I think a lot of people were surprised this wasn't on the sleepers list when I said that this is one of the last cards. This is one of the cards I wanted to point out on the last day of spoilers, where you can't point out every card because they release like 100 cards at a time. You have to pick the best 10 or 20 cards. So I pointed this card out that day, but I was surprised at the amount of backlash in the comments section at me, even though, again, I included it in the best cards of the day video for the last day. People still were kind of upset that I didn't kind of rate the card higher then. There were a lot of people that really seem to think like Sticky Fingers is the truth, and I'm still not 100% sure. Early on in the game, it sort of gives the creature pseudo-unblockability in the early terms. That makes it more likely to create treasure tokens. That's a 1 mana card that ramps you. And when the creature does die, which it inevitably will, right, you draw the card. So it's kind of like that mitigates. That mitigates being an aura. You don't get 2 for 1 when the creature dies. It's only a 1 mana investment. And it's a 1 mana card that creates treasure, which is also very good, right? But I still don't think... I think this card is a question of opportunity cost. I can't think of too many decks that would want to play 4 copies of Sticky Fingers rather than play a more powerful card. And that even goes for like Naya Runes. Naya Runes has to play Kami of Transience. It's got to play... it doesn't have to, but it often plays like Portrait of Michiko. It's got to play Generous Visitor. It's got to play... Excuse me. It's got to play 12 different runes. Maybe I already said that. But... you know, after you put all your portraits in the deck and you put all your runes in the deck and you put your, 12 to 16 creatures in the deck, you just don't really have room for too much else. So you have to find room for like maybe your 2 of Sticky Fingers. And even then, is it really worth it? Do you need the treasure that badly in that deck? Do you even need the menace that badly in that deck? Right? I mean, it's kind of cool to like Kami of Transience dies, you draw a card and you get the Kami back. So like, there's cool things about the card, but I can't think of a deck that would spend 4 precious slots to play this card right now. But I could be way off base. I could be super off base. But I'm still going to just give the card like a 2. I think it's very interesting, but I don't think that it's quite where it needs to be playability-wise. Strangle is up next. The sorcery speed frostbite that you don't have to work for. You could also just call this a very bad lightning bolt. But is very bad lightning bolt still playable in standard? Maybe. I could see this seeing play in spots. I really could. If you're a mono red aggro mage, but you don't want to work for frostbite, or you just don't want to play snow-covered lands for whatever reason, right? Then Strangle could be better in those decks, right? So I'm going to give this card like a 2. I think it's possible it could see standard play, but it's never going to be the best card in its deck. It's just removal, but it's still a fine card. 2, 2.25, Structural Assault is something else I considered putting on the sleepers list because it's going to be really good when Brothers War comes out. If artifacts are everywhere, this card is going to be amazing, but do note that you can have, just a bunch of treasure tokens out or something like that. And then destroy all artifacts. And that is going to make it to where you effectively wrap the board with this card too. I wouldn't be surprised to see this in big red. Mr. Sweeper in big red, because you can make cards that make treasure tokens. You can even play other artifacts in that deck that you don't mind popping for one reason or another. Right? They do something when they pop, or maybe they do something out of your graveyard. Who knows? But I could see big red playing some small number of artifacts, mostly things that create treasure tokens, and then just effectively wrapping the board with this. But you also get to like pick up all the artifacts like the Asika's Chariots and stuff at the same time, and that's like kind of cool. So I like this card, but I don't think that it's super playable. I think it has to be enabled, and the way to enable it is to play cards you're going to blow up with it, which is not something you usually want to do, like blow up your own cards that you worked hard to put on the table. So I don't know. I'm just going to give it like a 2.25 for now, but I can see this card being improved later on in life. Torch Breath it's not good for standard. Don't be tricked by this card. I guess it's good as a sideboard card against blue cards, but like, how many blue things are you trying to kill with this? You know what I mean? Like, how many blue creatures or planeswalkers are currently seeing a ton of play in standard that you actually want to use this against? There just aren't better removal spells against, even out of the sideboard. I don't know. Just going to give it a 2. Unlucky Witness is next. Maybe the best 1-drop creature in the whole set. This thing is ridiculous. Unbelievable for sacrifice decks, the aristocrats decks, and stuff like that. I say it's the best 1-drop creature. It's not even the best 1-drop red creature. Goldhound is probably better than this, but Witness is still very good, man. I can't wait to get my hands on this card, play it in these sacrifice decks. It's just a sick little thing. So I like this. I'm going to give this a 2.75. I think it's about where we want to be. It could be as high as a 3. Urabrask, Heretic Praetor. I'm going to also give this a 2.75. I know that sounds crazy, but I think this might actually be a really good card, especially when Goldspan rotates out, which it will in about 6 or 7 months, something like that. But even before then, it competes with Goldspan, right? 5 mana for a 4/4 haste is kind of baseline at this point, but it's still like kind of standard playable just for that. And then not only do you get to draw, quote unquote, draw an extra card every turn, but it also kind of keeps your opponent from drawing cards. Like they get to draw a card the red way, but against control it's gonna be really good, right? Because like if they draw a counterspell off the top of their library, then by the way, I've seen some people say that your opponent also gets an extra card. That is not how this works. Your opponent, like, it's at the beginning of your opponent's upkeep, the next time they would draw a card this turn. So it's talking about their draw step. For your opponent's draw step, they draw the red way. So if they get like a counterspell, they can't just hold on to that. A removal spell, they can't just hold on to that, although they'll probably target Urabrask with it anyway. So I wonder how much this just eats removal, but the haste kind of helps mitigate against that. If it gets any number of turns in play, then it's just like probably really good turn over turn. So I like this card, and I will also give it a 2.75. Widespread Thieving is up next. This is kind of neat, man. Like, ramp whenever you cast a multicolored spell, but it doesn't really do anything the turn it enters the battlefield. 3 mana do-nothings aren't usually great, so I don't know, man. There's probably a number of 1 and 2 mana, like 1 mana hybrid cost things this could work with, especially in Historic, and some decent, 2 mana multicolored things with that you just like play this on turn 3, and then on turn 4 you drop a land, multicolored spell, that's 2 treasure tokens, another multicolored spell, get a treasure token. So like there's a way to do it, there's definitely ways to abuse this card in terms of like the mana it generates, but I'm still not sure that it's worth doing that. But if you're going to have a card like this that forces you to do nothing on the turn that you play it, you'd much rather it be a 3-drop than a 4 or 5-drop, right? So, I'm interested in the card, but I don't think that it's great. We'll give it a 2, something like that. Witty Roastmaster. This is one of my favorite cards in the entire set. It's an Impact Trimmers on a body. It costs 50% more than an Impact Trimmers. I don't care. It's an Impact Trimmers. I'm going to be playing it on stream, maybe even the first night of the season. I'll be playing this on stream. I'm really excited to play Witty Roastmaster. And they say that jokes don't hurt, right? You get it? Anyway, I've missed Impact Trimmers more than I've missed almost any card that has rotated out in the last few years. So I can't wait to play it, but if I'm being objective, it's not going to take over Standard. It's very likely. So I'm just going to give this card like a 2.5. If I'm being objective, I'll give it a 2.5. But I want to give it a 3.5 because I love this card so much. But Wrecking Crew is up next. It's a 5-mana 4/5 reach trample. Card's not great. Let's give it a 1. Attended Socialite. Oh, we're in green. Let's take a sippy. We'll look next at Attended Socialite here. This is 2 mana, 1 and a green for a 2/1. So it's just kind of bread and butter. But it does have an interesting creature type. It's an elf, and it's got a cool alliance ability. I actually want to like this. It's probably against my best interest to like this, but you play it on 2, then on 3 you play 2 guys. Or you play 1 spell that makes 2 guys, right? And suddenly you can swing for 4. Next turn you play Eurysika's Chariot. You swing for 4. Right? So even though the card is probably not very good after turn 5 or so, you don't need it to be. In your green, aggro deck that's producing a ton of creatures the next few turns, you could feasibly play this and then like a join the dance on the next turn. Still have a mana left over to play another creature and swing for 5. Like, that's surely not terrible. Even if all you do is like Attended Socialite on 2. Turn 3, Reckless Stormseeker, and then swing for a total of 6. I mean, you could be doing worse, right? So I want to like this, but it's probably not great. The best part is probably the flavor text, all things considered. But I'm still going to give the card a solid 2. I think it's, like, possible. I really do. But that's probably not a great card. 2's about as solid as I can go on that. Bootlegger Stash has one of the most powerful text boxes in the entire set, but it's also not good. Not a good card. I'll give this like a 1.75. We'll play it on stream. I promise we'll play it on stream, like Dragon Spark Reactor or something like that. But it's not good. It's better than a Brass's Bounty, but it's still not great. Bouncer's Beatdown. These like color-specific sideboard cards just aren't really doing it for me in this set, but I guess you have to admit that they're okay, right? So I'll give it a 2. Broken Wings is a fine reprint, I guess. I'll give this like a... I'll give it, 2. I'll give that 2. Cabaretti Initiate up next. The common 1 mana, pump some mana into me and I do a thing ability. This guy looks really freaky. This is the freakiest looking raccoon in the entire set. It's probably the Broken Bottles, but in any case, this is not a good card, despite the fact that it's a raccoon and you have to love that. It's still just a 1. Chaldaya Strongarm is up next. This is also not a very good card. Even with the Blitz, this is not a good card. It's a 1. Capenna Express. I expressed some love of this card for Sealed, and I'm pretty sure people are going to disagree, but I actually think in Sealed this might be great. In Standard, it's not good. Even as a 4-mana 6/6, it's fairly easy to make a creature. I still don't think this is great. I'll give it a 2. Civic Gardener is up next. This is neat, but probably still not anywhere near as good as most ramp guys. Right? But it does have a form of pseudo-vigilance. It kind of looks like my granddad. A little bit. It really actually does. I haven't noticed that until just now, but it kind of does. So it can give creature pseudo-vigilance, itself pseudo-vigilance if it's got nothing else to do. It can untap your Gia's Cradle, right? In Commander, so there's that. But I still don't love this card. I'm just going to give it a 2 as well. It's kind of baseline. Cleanup Crew is up next. Look at all those ETB triggers. That's neat. You can pick one of those, and they're all kind of decent, but still not the best card. I do like this for budget reanimator, but outside of that, it's not good. So I'm just going to give it like a 1.5. Courier's Briefcase. Subtly one of the better green cards in the set, it turns out. Even in decks that can't Wooburg, this is probably going to replace Prosperous Innkeeper or just be like copies 5 and 6 of a Prosperous Innkeeper in some decks. In 5-color decks, you'll play 4 of this and then 2 Innkeepers if you play any Innkeepers. Just really good in 5-color decks. But even if you can't take advantage of it, I think it might see some play after the rotation just because it's a 2-mana, decent ramp piece that fixes mana and makes a 1/1. It's fine. So I'm just going to give Courier's Briefcase like a 3. A solid Magic card. Elegant Entourage is next. Not a very solid Magic card. Let's give it a 1.25. Evolving Door. I will not be tricked by this. I should really like this. There was a time in my Magic career where these kind of effects excited me to no end, but not anymore, especially considering, look at this, guys. It doesn't just put the card into play. It doesn't just put the card in the battlefield. Exile the card, then shuffle. You may cast the exile card by paying its casting cost. That's so stupid. That's terrible. I mean, it's a tutor effect, but it's still... Good lord. It never gets a monocolored creature. Well, I guess you could sacrifice an artifact creature and get a monocolored creature. Who cares? I don't want to be fooled by this card again, or cards like it. I'm just going to give this like a 1.75, even though it might be a ridiculous combo piece that does cool stuff. It's very disappointing in my opinion. Fight Rigging. This is a sparring regimen, but in some ways better, in some ways worse. I think you'll miss the pseudo-vigilance on regimen, but still kind of a decent card that could make its way, depending on what the format looks like, especially after rotation, into sort of, mono-green aggro decks. So I'll give this card a 2.25. It's not bad. For the Family is also not bad, by the way. This card is sneakily good. 1 mana for +2/+2 is baseline, but 1 mana for +4/+4 is very, very good. I believe that's a Might of Old Krosa kicked or something, which is, Might of Old Krosa was mostly important in like poison counter decks, but infect decks, really. This, a little different, but 1 mana for +4/+4 is still very good, and if you do have 4 creatures, it's much more likely that you're getting a creature through unblocked against your opponent. So +4/+4 for 1 is pretty good. So I don't hate this card, and I'll give it a 2. Freelance Muscle, I really like in Sealed. Somebody told me, by the way, in the comment section of a video that Arc Spitter is not called Tommy Gun because there's no guns in this set. That guy has a gun. That guy very obviously has a gun. So wrong, I guess. But anyway, Freelance Muscle's not good in Standard. It's a 1. Gala Greeters, another one of the better green cards in Standard. The guy, by the way, on this art, there's like 100 different arts for this card. But the guy front and center, the middle guy on this card, looks just like Eddie Izzard to me. If you don't know who Eddie Izzard is, he's awesome. Go check him out. But boy, does he look like modern day Eddie Izzard. But anyway, this card is good. This card is super good. There are going to be some turns where you can proc all 3 of these abilities, but either way, if anything's going to replace a Prosperous Innkeeper when that card rotates, it's this. There's some ways that this isn't as good as Prosperous Innkeeper. It's almost never going to be as good on turn 2 as an Innkeeper, but on most other turns, it's great. If you wait till turn 3 to play it and then play a 1-drop alongside it, that's probably good. It's kind of a Prosperous Innkeeper had a baby with like a Luminarch Aspirant, and that's probably a very good Magic card, especially considering the relevant creature type. So I'm going to give this a 3.25. I think it's a very relevant creature type. So let's move on to Glittermonger. I want to like this card, but 4 mana is too much for a dude that taps for treasure. Even in decks that can really take advantage of that, even in decks with Goldspan, even in decks with Stimulus Package, even in decks with blah, blah, blah. Zorn, I don't think Glittermonger is very good. I'm going to give the card a 1.5. High Rise Sawjack is kind of poo-poo. Let's give that card a 1. Jewel Thief, possibly the best common in the set. Definitely the best green common. Almost certainly, right? Card's just unbelievable. 3 mana, 3/3, Vigilance, Trample, ETB's Treasure Token. How could you possibly ask for more from a Magic card? For a relatively low investment, good stats, 2 keyword abilities, and ramps you, and fixes. Just come on, man. Jewel Thief is so good, but it is in a weird spot where I'm not sure that it sees all the play. It does crew a lot of important vehicles right now, but it doesn't crew in Asika's Chariot. I'll say that, but it does crew like Reckoner Bankbuster and a couple of other things. So I don't know. I could see Jewel Thief seeing some play just as a generically decent 3-drop, but like Briarbridge Tracker is already a generically decent 3-drop that doesn't see a lot of play, and it can crew Chariot and draw cards. So It's kind of hard to say where this is going to end up, but it is obviously a powerful Magic card, and I'm going to give it a 2.75. Let's get Jules C just on the south side of 3. Luxurious Libation is a Howl from Beyond that also makes a guy. Am I crazy? Is that really good? Am I off base here? Is that like fine? You probably don't play it in your decks, right? Because Howl from Beyond just isn't what it used to be. Used to be Howl from Beyond was the black fireball. It could win games, but I don't think we're doing that anymore. This is a huge mana commitment that most likely sits in your hand a lot of the game, but I don't know. You're giving me a guy. I'm interested. It's just a free guy on my Howl from Beyond? Like, sure. It's a strictly better Howl from Beyond in a color that didn't necessarily need the help. So I as a 1995 gamer who loves Howl from Beyond, I really want to give this card like a 2.75, but it's not any better than a 1.75 in reality. Not really. Up next is Most Wanted. This card is probably not actually good, but super tempting, isn't it? Flash onto a creature that's about to die and get 2 treasure tokens? Like, God, it seems really good. So this could be decent. Again, probably the deck that would want to play it the most is the Naya Runes deck, and it doesn't. I don't think it wants this card. So I just don't know where it goes. I really don't. But 2 treasure tokens when your guy dies is probably good, especially when you can do this as a surprise, flash it into play. Prize Fight is next. Oh, did I rate Most Wanted? I'll give it a 1.75. 1.5 in that area. Prize Fight is up next. This is a really good green common too. If you want to talk about the best green commons in the set, this is up there. Fight effect at instant speed with a treasure token, like that's so unbelievable. Especially alongside some of the creatures we have access to, Werewolf Pack Leader and stuff. Early on in the game, you can cast this, kill a guy, keep your guy, make a treasure. It's so good. This card seems quite good to me. So I'm gonna give this a 2.75. I think it's like way up there in terms of the playable removal, not just in the set, but in this format. A treasure token is, God, is a treasure token good to get off this card. But Rock's Pummeler is next. Not great. Not a good card. Let's give it a 1.25. Riveteer's Decoy, I have eventually learned that this is not a card that all of the opponent's creatures have to block. It just has to be blocked by a guy, so I think it makes it way worse than I thought it was. It's not a straight up lure effect, but I still think it's fine. I'll give it a 2, just for being a 2-mana 3/1. Social Climber is obviously not a Prosperous Innkeeper or anything, or an Impassioned Orator. Like, the extra mana is going to matter, but I think still people will try to force this into their green-white life gain decks with like Trelasara, and I'm pretty sure it's actually going to kind of be a mistake. But since they won't let you play Impassioned Orator on Arena in Best of 1 anymore, maybe you can only play Impassioned Orator in Alchemy. Maybe this is the thing that's supposed to like make up for not having Orator anymore. So that's kind of cool. I guess I'll give it like a 2. A solid card. But probably more a trap than anything else in these life gain decks. The life gain decks in and of themselves are a trap. But Take It to the Streets is not good. Card gets a 1.5. Titan of Industry is probably the card that I most want to reanimate in the entire set. Even more than Lord Xander, even more than the stupid Bant thing, Soul of What's-Its-Face. We'll get to it. I really want to reanimate this card, like, so bad. The choose 2 on it in both things are very good, almost no matter what you choose. This seems like a sick card, and it's almost made the sleepers list, because I think it could be way better than anyone's giving it credit for. Everyone's like, it's fun. But reanimate, or even just a ramp guy. Ramp into this guy seems really good too. So I like him. I'm going to give him a 2.75. I'm actually going to do that. I think it's actually a kind of a phenomenal Magic card in some ways. Topiary Stomper's next. I don't like this as much as a lot of people do, but I still will probably have to admit that it's one of the better 3-mana go get a land things. And it goes and gets a land. That's good. For landfall decks and other things that care about you actually having lands, like Waking Trolls and stuff, you need to have lands, not just like, oh, I attach this thing to my land and it makes more mana. I don't want that. I want to go and get lands. This does that. So it shouldn't be too hard to get to 7 lands. Turn 5, something like that. So it could be fine, but I don't like it as much as I do. But it's still a good Magic card. I keep using the word solid, but I think that's actually the best way to describe these kind of on the fringe cards. So I'm going to give this a 2.5. I think it's okay. Venom Connoisseur, I really want to like this, especially in the Fin decks. But I guess in the Fin decks, all your creatures are supposed to have Death Touch already. So it's not as good. Just the Binding the Old Gods ability occasionally. I think it's way better in Sealed than it is in Standard, where it's not going to see any play 1.25. Vivian on the Hunt as we round the corner on the green cards. We're almost there, guys. Vivian on the Hunt is probably the worst Planeswalker in the set. I hear there's some stuff you can do with her in Modern. All that. Of course, we're here to talk about Standard. I don't love the +2. Especially on a Planeswalker that like doesn't have an ultimate. You know what I mean? Like, you're not working towards anything really when you plus it, but it could work. I really don't like how the +2 works with the -1 that creates a 4/4. Because, you know, you make a 4/4 and the next turn you can sacrifice it to the +2 and go get a 1-drop. That's not great. I wish it had more synergy with itself, but still, a 4 loyalty Planeswalker that -1s to make a 4/4, that's really good. It's so good. That's really good. And there's even going to be times where you +1 it and get like 3 cards off of the stupid thing. So maybe it's better than I think it is in like an Abzan mid-range deck of some stripe or another. But I'm still just going to give this card like a 3. You know, as Planeswalkers go, it's powerful, but it's not the best one in the set by far. So I do like it, but I think 6 mana is slightly steep for this. However, all the people that say it's not a good Planeswalker, like it's actively bad, okay, wait until your opponent plays a Vivian against you and they just get like, you know, a 4/4 Rhino every turn for 3 turns. Like, you know, okay, that's going to be super fun to play against. But anyway, let's look at Voice of the Vermin next. This almost too made the pre-release guide because I think it's actually really good and sealed, right? Even draft, you know, 4 mana, effectively 4/4 with a shield counter is kind of good. So it's really not bad. But in Standard, it does absolutely nothing at all, even with the shield counter. I'll give this a 1.5. Warm Welcome is a cool little Magic card, isn't it? This is a cool. I like this card. Instant speed, sort of top 5 is a pretty good dig. You get the best creature from among them and a guy. Like, I don't know that this card is Standard playable, but in like combo decks or decks that are looking for one very specific important creature to their strategy, they're like maybe, but. The fact that it affects your board state while also digging you for a card, like, it's better. It's probably better than God, what is it called? See the Truth or whatever it is. Like the 3 mana blue card with the man in the boat. We always just call it the man in the boat. Anyway, it might even be just better than that card. But 3 mana instant speed, top 5 dig, get a creature, 1/1 guy. That's fine. There's nothing. Sorry. There's nothing wrong with that. So just a sick little card that I'm actually going to be forced to give like a 2.5. It's good to actually see some play at the end of the day, but very, very sparing. Now, one of my absolute favorite cards in the next set, we'll finish off green here. Workshop War Chief. This dude is so awesome. And you can even see he's doing he's doing this. It even looks like the way his lips are formed. That's how he's talking, my Rhino brothers. Don't be a scab or whatever, you know what I mean? So I think this guy's awesome. Just the way he looks and his outfit, his green pinstripe pants with little suspenders. Yes. But like, again, we're judging cards for Standard here. And even though like the dude has dripped all the way off the planet, like that drip is amazing. As far as the function of the card goes, it's incredible. 5 mana for this is such a good rate. 5 mana seems like a lot to pay for almost any Magic card, but 5 mana is a lot for this rate because you're not really paying for 5 power. You're paying for 9 power for your 5 mana, which is pretty good. Yes, this can get Vanishing Verse and you're going to feel bad or whatever, but in those cases, it still would have at least gained you the 3 life. I'll take it. You know what I mean? There are spots where your opponent like taps out, like your Vanishing Verse playing opponent taps out. That's cool. Just blitz this into play, hit him for 5 and draw a card and gain 3 life and get a 4/4 when it dies. Like, God, I think this card is maybe one of the better like mid-range signifiers in this set. It's kind of a Thragtusk. It's kind of a Siege Rhino. He's still his own man. You know? So I can't wait to try and play with this card. I think it's just generically powerful, and that's all it needs to be. There's nothing frilly about that, nothing fancy about this guy over here. He's just gonna like beat you down, and when you kill him, he's gonna send somebody else to beat you down. So I like this dude an awful lot. And he's one of my favorite cards in the set, actually. I'm gonna give this guy a 3.75, one of the higher scores so far in the set. But I do think it's one of the better cards we've looked at too. But we'll move on to gold next. After I take a quick sip, hit the cough button. I think I have to do that now. Let's move on to Avon Heartstabber. We're in the gold cards now. There's some real power here. Heartstabber looks really cool to me. I mean, it's like, again, Spirited Companion. Dusk Legion Zealot, Elvis Visionary. It's like a 2-mana draw a card thing, but it draws when it dies. Right, but it also helps out your mill strategies. If you play it later in the game or it lasts for a while, if it doesn't die somehow, you'll eventually have paid 2 mana for a 3/3 flyer. That's pretty good. So altogether, sweet little card, but I just don't really know like what home this card has. I think there is like a casualty deck that's blue and black and plays like Make Disappear and a couple of other things, right? That wants to sacrifice guys, and this guy goes pretty well in that deck. But end of the day, I'm still just going to give him like a 2.5. I think it's a little narrow. I won't even say narrow. Narrow is a terrible word for this because he is generically powerful. In a vacuum, there's a 2-mana flyer that draws a card when it dies, and that's just good, right? But the lack of like a real stable home for this guy, I think I have to give him like a 2.5 or 2.75 at the most. Black Market Tycoon is neat. Obviously, it's a cat in a suit. I just can't get over it, man. I want to put my cat in a little suit. They gave him a little suit. Tailored, too. It looks good. But, anyway, this guy's cool. Tapping for a treasure token is sweet with Stim Package and Goldsmane Dragon and all this other stuff. Zorn, right? So, it's all the same cards I named earlier. It's kind of neat with. And you really shouldn't have to take too much damage from this card. If you actually use your treasure token, you shouldn't have to take too much damage from this card. Also works pretty well with Professional Face Baker. That's an even more metal name when you think about it. Professional Face Baker. But no, with Professional Face Breaker, this basically translates to tap, draw a card, kind of, right? So cool things for this thing to do, but at the end of the day, I still think it's just kind of okay. I'll give the card a 2.75. Body Dropper. I am excited to play with you, my man. I have grown on this card. When I first read it, I was just kind of like, why don't I like you? You should be better than this. I think I want his sacrifice ability to be better. It's just not very good. It's Menace is, I guess, fine. 2 mana is the problem, and it's 2 mana of, it's a black and a red. You can't just pay like 2 whatever mana. Even then, 2 mana would be way too much. So I hate the baked-in sacrifice ability on the card, but whenever you sacrifice another creature, counter on dropper, that's unbelievable. It's so good. Also, if it were permanent, if you sacrifice like treasure tokens or lands or something, that would be really good. But even with just sacking creatures, I think this is kind of nice. Obviously, in like an Aristocrats deck, this could get to like a 5/5 relatively easily, but you're still like going down on board presence to do that. No. I want to like this a lot. It has grown on me since I first read it, and obviously as a Aristocrats player myself, is like one of my favorite kinds of decks. You would think I would really like this card, but just to get it to a 5/5 or a 6/6 is probably, way more work than like the life gain deck has to do to get the Voice of Resurgence up to 6/6, and it's still not a very good deck, right? So, in this deck you have to go down on board presence to get this guy to a 5/5. I don't necessarily love the idea of that, so I like this dude, I do, but I'm still just going to give him like a 2.5. He's only good in the one kind of deck, and even then, even though you think he would be the most important creature in those decks, he's probably not at the end of the day. So let's move on to Brazen Upstart. This art here looks like, no one's going to get this reference, but he looks like Benvolio from the Baz Luhrmann Romeo and Juliet. I think that's Benvolio. Romeo's friend, the blonde guy, he looks kind of like meatheadish, It's not that it's Benvolio, it looks just like him to me. But all that aside, really hurting my speed run here. Fine card. 3 mana for 4 power with a keyword ability. The 2 toughness is the worst thing about the card, but the fact that he effectively draws you a creature when he comes into play could be like more than enough value. So 5 years ago, I would have given this card a 3.5. A 3 mana 4 power guy with a keyword ability. Where's the downside? He draws a card. Like, I would have been insane. I would have been like really fawning over this guy a few years ago. I think we're at the point in Standard Magic, and I'm at the point where I've learned enough. I've learned more about Magic in the last 5 years than I did in the previous 23, so I don't like this card as much as I used to, and I think Standard has largely moved beyond cards like this. If you're going to play a thing like this, it needs to be more aggressive, but at the same time, there's still part of me that wants to give this card a very high score, but I'm going to stop at about 2.75. Anyway, next. Let's do Broker's Ascendancy. I haven't done an Ascendancy yet, have I? This Ascendancy is busted. This one's very good. You basically get, extra at the beginning of your end step, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control and a loyalty counter on each Planeswalker. Yeah. So this is it's a very, very good magic card that doesn't really do anything the turn it comes into play except for grow your creatures, which is probably good. But what I'm really interested in here is extra loyalty counters on your planeswalkers. But what really wins you the game is very likely putting a counter on each creature you control every single turn. It's one of the more simple ascendancies, but it's also kind of one of the better ones at the end of the day. So I'm going to give this one like a 3. Yeah, let's give it a 3. Broker's Charm. I like every charm, but I especially like Broker's in Standard. Draw 2 cards for 3 mana at instant speed is fine. And then also, you have that and a removal spell. And the tertiary mode, Destroy Target Enchantment, is also like really very useful. So I think Broker's is one of the better charms for Standard play, period. And I'm going to give this card a 3 as well. It's just very good. But Cabaret Ascendancy's next. This basically draws you an extra turn or extra card every turn, so long as you get a creature or planeswalker. So I don't love this. If you hit a land off of it, it effectively didn't do anything. I imagine you play it on turn 3 and it doesn't do anything the turn you play it. You spend all your mana. The next turn, you go to look at the top card of your library, and it's a land. So you put the land on the bottom of your library, and then you draw a land. So it's got to feel pretty bad. There really will be, just because of the way Magic works, the way decks work. There's going to be games where this is only like a 20% chance of happening, but 20% is kind of a lot. If you play this on turn 3, you whiff on turn 4, and you whiff on turn 5, you lose. You lose the game. So the idea is to put this in a deck that has nothing but creatures, planeswalkers, and lands in it. All right. To maximize the sort of double draw mode on it, but I want to like this more than I do. I really do. I think that we'll just whiff with this on Arena like over and over. So let's just give this like a 2.5. It's probably decent Commander. I don't know about Standard. Cabaret Charm is next. Not one of the best charms for Standard, but still underrated, I think. The removal ability is not great. Make 2 guys is not great because there's better ways of doing that don't strain your mana as hard. And obviously, the Overrun ability in some ways is one of the better abilities on the card if you have enough creatures in play, which Cabaret should. But altogether, still just not the best removal, or not the best charm spell here in this set. So I'm going to give it a 2.5, but I still think it's somewhat playable. Celestial Regulator, good stats for limited, but probably doesn't see any standard play, 1.5. Ceremonial Groundbreaker, it's a trap. Don't play it. Even if you have citizens, I would not. Like if you're playing like the budget citizens deck in Constructed, I still don't love this card there. So I'm just going to give this like a 1.75. Civil Servant is good in the Citizens deck, but still probably not as good as you want it to be. I'm just going to give this card like a 2. Cormella, Glamour Thief up next. Neat card, but kind of weird in some ways. But it is ramp, does have haste, and it does like get you a probably removal or draw spell back when it dies. Get back like a Memory Deluge. It could be good. So I'm not putting the card out entirely, but I think it'd be way better if it had haste, or if it had flash. That said, you play it for 5 mana, right? You pay it for 4 with 1 up, then she can kind of pay back some of the mana you spent to play her. So it's not terrible. If you're holding a counter spell, then it's kind of a flash card, like a card with a weird version of flash. You know what I mean? So neat thing here. However, I don't think that it's ultimately very powerful in Standard at the end of the day, and I'm just going to give this like a 2.5. No, let's give it a 2.25. I think it's about that level, but it could be better than I think it is. Corpse Appraiser looks like a very solid Magic card, and I want to give that a 2.75. You have the mana to play it, the stats are good enough, and again, Strategic Planning is a hell of a card to get to play, for an ETB trigger with decent creature types too. So just a fine card. I'll give it a 2.75. Quark's Explosion, I hate. I don't like this card. You want to be playing creatures in your deck, right? But you also want to be able to blow up creatures. Like you want a sweeper really badly, but you also need to play creatures, and you can't just play creatures that you don't mind sacrificing. Like it'd be one thing if you could Deadly Dispute an Eye Twitch into your graveyard and then exile the Eye Twitch to Corpse Explosion and kill your opponent's whole team or something. But no, you just deal like 1 damage to your opponent's whole team. This card does not seem very good to me. The deck building implications, where I have to play a number of not just creatures but like relatively big creatures if I want this to be a good sweeper. I have to get them into my graveyard. If I do use my big creature to Corpse Explode, then I can't reanimate that creature because I have to exile a creature from my graveyard to cast this. So well, I just kind of wasted my Hull Breaker Horror. You know, yeah, I did 7 damage to everything, but now I can't reanimate the Hull Breaker. Like, I hate this card. But I'm still going to give it like a 1.75 because it's a 3-mana sweeper, and that could be okay sometimes. Discard a big fat guy into your yard on turn 2 somehow. Corpse Explosion on 3 against aggro is still good. So I can't hate the card, but there's just so many like awkward things about it. Let's move on to Crew Captain. I love this card. I really, really like Crew Captain. I think this is actually, aside from maybe Reckless Stormseeker and like maybe like one other card that I'm not thinking of right now, and there are plenty of really good white 3-drops, right? But I'm not talking about, note that I'm going to use my words very carefully. I think this card right here might be the best aggressive 3-drop in the format. Now, I didn't say this is the best 3-drop for aggressive decks. I didn't say that. That's probably Reckless Stormseeker. That's probably something like Adeline, or even Brutal Cathar is a good example, right? Like those are great 3-drops for aggressive decks. But in terms of like the single most aggressive 3-drop in the format, I think Crew Captain might be it, you know? It basically gets a free attack. It just gets to attack for free, no worries, no cares about dying on turn 3 when it ETBs. Now, my problem with this is that if you're building 3-color aggro decks, it's actually way harder than you think to get this card on curve on turn 3. So it could be a bit of a trap in some ways because, you know, again, perfect mana is not unheard of, obviously, but it's harder to get than you think. So if you can play this card on curve, I think it's very good. Like, very, very, very good. However, on subsequent turns, it's probably not as good. But, you know, the first turn it's in play is turn 3. Your opponent's probably going to trade something on blocks if they can block it. If they can't block it, they take 4 from it, which is pretty good on turn 3, right? But you know, if your opponent blocks it on turn 3, then they almost certainly trade with it on turn 4. And that's kind of still fine. You know, it's kind of still okay. So this is in some ways like kind of one of my favorite cards in the set. I really, really, really like Crew Captain a lot. And I'm going to give this card like a 3.25. I know I shouldn't. I'm trying to be objective here. But when we're analyzing aggressive 3-drops in Standard, I will repeat. I know I have a habit of repeating myself. But even though this isn't the best 3-drop for aggressive decks, I think that you could make the argument it's the most aggressive 3-drop. Again, different things. But, I mean, it just junned aggro. You know what I mean? Try that out. But we'll move on to Darling in the Masses, which is kind of a budget-centric tribal citizens, you know, anthem effect. I don't know, man. It makes 2/1s when it swings. That's fine, but really not the card you want to be on in Standard right now, I think, when you compare it to the rest of the Standard power level. Citizens is just kind of a memey budget deck that we will be messing around with. I'm interested, but I worry. I worry that the Citizens deck isn't super great. It's probably a draft deck. It's just a draft archetype, all things considered. But in Standard, I'll just give the card like a 2. You know, it's fine. Disciplined Duelist. I really want to like this card too. Double Strike is a sweet ability, especially with shield counter, right? That's very good. So I like it. I think it's good for like Bogle's decks where you put enchantments or auras on it and stuff, or maybe anthem effects, whatever you want to do. But I still kind of worry that this isn't as good as I want it to be. I'm just going to give the card a 2.25. I think it's just kind of okay, but not generically good enough to really see a ton of play. Unless, you know, there's just a very good Bant Enchantments deck out there that wants it that badly. Endless Detour is a great card. A really good card here. I think this is maybe instantly one of the more annoying cards in the set. Can you imagine having this and Divide by 0 in the format at the same time? You know, like, you just can't do anything on turn 3. So, and this is probably worse than Divide by 0. It doesn't give your opponent, when I say worse, I mean like more annoying in that way. This doesn't give the opponent like card advantage or selection or anything like that, the way Divide did. But this puts the card on top. You're going to end up putting the card on top a lot of the time. And that's annoying. It's so annoying. You effectively skip your next draw step, you know, to draw something you already had. It kind of sucks. But then other times your opponents are going to, you know, put a non-land permanent on top when it attacks. Or they're going to, you know, save one of their own things with this card. Or they're going to make it to where they get a card back from the graveyard, basically, right? So, like, This card does like 12 different things, and they're all desirable. It's just one of the most versatile cards in Standard. And people have said, that this ability isn't a counterspell, it's not very good, and blah, blah, blah. And it's like Memory Lapse just got banned in Historic. Like, Memory Lapse is too much for Historic. And even though harder to cast, more expensive than Memory Lapse, I just want to, it's the best way to compare this ability to another card. This card is extremely annoying. I'm letting you know right now. In case you don't know, this card is unbelievably annoying. And I'm going to give it a 3.25. I think it's that good. Evelyn the Covetous. Guys, I really like this card. Like a lot. I don't know how clear I've made that so far this season, but I think Evelyn is almost sleeper level. This card is fine. You can play it in mono black too, by the way, like the way it's, the casting cost works. Or you can play in Dimir, you can play in Rakdos, whatever. Or you can play in Grixis, obviously. So versatile in terms of what decks you can play. And it's got good creature types. It kind of draws 2 cards when it comes into play, and the flash really helps you, actually draw 2 cards off of this. If you play more vampires, you get to technically draw even more cards. So, I don't know, man. It's actually kind of a sweet card. If it didn't have flash, I wouldn't even be looking at it. But the flash makes me really like this card a lot. And even though this is going to be a higher score than I think most people want me to give this card, I'm going to give this card a 2.75. I think this card could have a real chance in Standard. I do. Exotic Pets is up next. This is neat too. Instant speed, and you get 2 guys that can't be blocked. That's neat, It's like instantly probably the best 3 mana create 2 guys thing in the format. It's probably not as good as Omen of the Sun was in its format, because Omen of the Sun was an enchantment. It also gained you life. You could Yorion your Omen of the Sun. You can't do that with this. But I don't know. Making 2 unblockable guys is kind of neat. So if you have a +1/+1 counter on a creature, you're actually making 3 power rather than 2. It's probably good for 3 mana. So I don't hate this card. I'm going to give it a 2.25. It's not bad. Falco Spara Pact Weaver. I think this is a almost commander only card, but the shield counter could be, make this card way better than I think it is. 4 mana 3/3 Flample for some reason. Just the 4 mana 3/3 flying would make sense. I'm not really sure what he's trampling through. Well, he's trampling through a number of X1s in Standard, I guess. But the shield counter is good. I don't want to remove the shield counter from Falco, but there should be a way to build a deck in such a way that you have plenty of other counters to effectively draw cards from the top of your library. Only problem is, you got Luminarch Aspirant. That's the one everyone says with this card. You got Luminarch Aspirant. Are you really going to, come down 2 or 3 power on your guys to play those cards? It really depends on what those cards are, but people act like you just play things from the top of your library with no downside, but trust me, depending on certain game states, you really don't want to be taking those counters off those guys. So, I don't know. 4 mana is a lot for this. Looks like a commander card, but I'm still going to give it a 2.7. Well, a 2.5. I'll give it a 2.5. 2.5. As a commander, I'll give it a 3.5. But as a standard playable Magic card, kind of disappointing. 2.5. Fatal Grudge, also a little bit disappointing, but still probably playable. I think it's a playable card. The draw a card makes it really noteworthy. I think that's what kind of makes this card. And the ability to effectively blow up any treasure or any permanent type. So that's probably good too. As far as Edict effects go, it's the best one we've seen since Angrass Rampage, which did see a little bit of play every now and again. So I'm going to go ahead and give Fatal Grudge a 2.5. I think it's around that neighborhood somewhere. Fleetfoot Dancer is not Lightning Angel, but I guess it's in some ways better, in some ways worse, right? But still a good card. It has more power toughness than Lightning Angel. And I think that in an Anaya deck that's trying to be aggressive, this could be another just extremely aggressive, creature at 4 mana. You could make the argument that it's the most aggressive 4 mana creature in the format. Ulvenwald Odyssey is probably easier to cast, so there's that. But still, just a really, really fine creature for the mana cost here. Does compete with Chariot and all that, but I'll still end up giving this like a 2.75. I think, again, just generically good is the order of the day here. It's a fine Magic card. Forge Boss makes me a little bit angry. Does this not look slightly like Pleasant Kenobi? Am I crazy? This card makes me mad because it only triggers once each turn, but still good. It can trigger on your opponent's turn too, so there's instant speed, deadly disputes triggers off of. And even though it's not a Blood Artist, it's still almost playable. I really don't want to pay 4 mana for this effect. I really don't. I think that it makes the their goal with this card was to make sure that the sacrifice deck was probably like a draft only thing. You know, this card doesn't look standard playable to me, but I still kind of like it a little bit as like a, you know, a sort of finisher for the sacrifice decks that can deal 4 damage every turn cycle, which is nothing to sneeze at. So it's not terrible. Goes kind of well in the only cold anvil decks and stuff, but even with the steep mana cost, I think I am going to give it like a 2.5, you know. A very important card for just like the one kind of deck, but it is important. Glamorous Outlaw. Glamorous Outlaw is next. This is the first of the fixer cards, and I don't think that this one is great, but, you know, I will take a scry 2. I will take 2 damage to each opponent. Not all of these fixers do something when they ETB, and I highly value the ones that do something when they ETB a lot more than the ones that don't. So this card is not bad in sealed, but it won't see any standard play. I'll give it a 1.5. Hostile Takeover is not the best sweeper in the world, but it could be one-sided. Could be. And it usually takes out even big guys, or at least one big guy, right? So I don't think it's anywhere near as good as Depopulate, which is still one of the highest rated cards in the set so far from this review. But it is a decent sweeper, so I'm still going to give the card a 3. It's all right. Incandescent Aria, also a decent sweeper, and could be effectively a win condition in tokens decks, right? So do like this. It kind of sucks in mirror matches, but it's still a fine card for the tokens decks. So I'm going to give this one another solid 3. I think it's more than fine. It's probably better than Hostile Takeover, but it's a 3 for different reasons. Moving on to Jetmir, Nexus of Revels. This, again, just like a lot of the other family legends at this level in the set, at Mythic rarity, are probably more meant for Commander, but it's not hard to get a total of 3 creatures out and get the first Anthem effect on this, at which point it's okay. 4 mana for a 5/4. And at that point, it'll be 4 mana for a 6/4 if you have 2 other guys out. And then also 6/4 Vigilance for 4 mana. Like, that's good enough in and of itself. If you ever do have 5 other creatures out, a total of 6 creatures, giving all your guys, you know, he's basically just by himself. He's a 7/4 with Trample and Vigilance. Like, that's good for 4 mana. If you ever do get to 9 total creatures, you're probably winning the game anyway. But giving your creature like all of your guys like triple Embercleave wins the game. So I don't know. Maybe this is better than I think it is in standard, but I wouldn't expect to get a board full of creatures in a format so rich with, I say a board full of sweepers. I wouldn't expect to get a board full of creatures in a set so rich with sweepers, is what I mean to say. So, but maybe you'll just get the first Anthem effect off of this, and if you do, it's probably just kind of fine. So I don't hate this card. I'll give it a 3. Jetmir's Fixer is next. I don't like this card. I really don't. And it could be like better than I think it is. 2 mana 2/2. Can get counters if you use treasure and all that. So maybe this gets to like a 4/4 really easily for your 2 mana investment. But really, every time you want to grow it, you're investing 2 more mana into it. So how good is that? I don't know. I want to like this card more than I do, but I really kind of don't. I'm just going to give it like a 1.5. Jenny Faye is up next, another card that I really like. Note, by the way, that this says whenever you create 1 or more tokens, not token creatures. So if you create treasures, for instance, or, you know, if you create token copies of, say, a Planeswalker, which you can do in this set, or you create, you know, a clue token, for instance. You know, there's a lot of different tokens that aren't creature tokens. But, you know, when you create any number of tokens, you just make cats or dogs instead, and that's pretty sweet. It's also very, very cool that the cats have haste. That's so awesome. Like, just this into an Asika's Chariot on the next turn is good because now the cats have haste. You get almost the exact same cats, but they're faster. It's pretty good. So if you just want to attack with the cats, you can, right, that turn. So I don't know. I think this is actually, in a lot of ways, one of the better sort of like playable legends in the set. We're about to look at one that's even more playable, but Jenny Faye for just 3 mana. Play it in mono green if you want to. Naya, Gruul, Selesnya, whatever. You know, for 3 mana 3/3 with a decent creature type. And the ability to really give you a lot of value off of playing treasures and Asika's Chariots and stuff like that. Like, yeah, I think this card is maybe standard playable. It's possible. So I'm going to give this a 2.75. Lagreya the Magpie is up next. Could be Lagrella, probably Lagreya. This is just like a super Banisher Priest, you know? And for that reason, I think I have to give it, again, like a 2.75 or 3. You know, so it's just a playable Magic card, because those cards tend to be. This one even has the upside of not being able to die to, like, shock effects that deal 2 damage. And, you know, like Brutal Cathar doesn't have that. Skyclave Apparition doesn't have that. This can also repeat ETB triggers and make your guys bigger, right? But in case you're interested or confused about how the card works, you only get to choose 2 creatures with this. exile any number of other target creatures controlled by different players. So one creature controlled by your opponent, one creature controlled by you. But you don't have to. That's why it says any number of. You don't have to exile one of yours. You don't have to exile one of theirs. But the most you can exile with this is 2. 1 yours, 1 theirs. But just the fact that it's a Banisher Priest, I think it's a playable Magic card. 2.75, 3, somewhere in there. Lord Xander the Collector. Maybe the actual best reanimation target in the set. Although I really think Titan of Industry is just better. I actually have problems with this card. Best thing about it in Standard is that you can reanimate it with Olivia. And that's pretty sick stuff. Reanimate with Olivia. You do, by the way, I had somebody fight me on this. This is absolutely true. If you reanimate this with Olivia, it is tapped and attacking when you reanimate it. That means that you miss the attack trigger and you will not mill half your opponent's library the first time this attacks after being reanimated by an Olivia. Creatures that come into play tapped and attacking miss attacks triggers. Keep that in mind. But even with that said, it enters the battlefield, you mind twist your opponent. That seems good. If it ever does die, your opponent has to sack half their stuff. Seems okay. Although not as good as you think. They still get to keep their best stuff, so who cares? But altogether, seems good with Olivia. If your Olivia dies, you get to keep your Lord Xander. All that's good. Cool reanimation target. We will be playing him on stream. But ultimately, I don't actually think he's that powerful. I really don't. I'm going to give this card a 2.75 altogether. Maestro's Ascendancy, it's basically a Leer, kind of. However, you have to sacrifice creatures. Yeah, you have to sacrifice creatures rather than just have a Leer out. And so in some ways, I think Leer is better, easier to cast, although it's 2 more mana. You kind of don't care that Leer costs that much because you're going to play it later in the game anyway. But I guess the argument there is that you can play Maestro's Ascendancy on the same turn that you play a Leer and have more mana up to protect you or the Ascendancy or whatever. So it makes sense. But altogether, I still don't love this because there's deck building implications. I have to play this enchantment, which is neither an instant or sorcery or creature, right? But I also have to play a bunch of instants and sorceries in my deck if I want to have enough instants and sorceries to reliably recast from my graveyard. But I also have to play a bunch of creatures in my deck, so I have enough things to sacrifice to recast the stuff out of my yard. So you see, you have to play a balance of creatures and spells. And not only that, this is an enchantment, which is neither a creature or an instant or sorcery. So it's a problem. I guess you get around some of that by playing instants and sorceries that make creatures that you can then sacrifice to replay instants and sorceries. That could be fun. All that's good. This is, in some ways, better than Leer because you can still counter spells with this in play. So you can play counter spells out of your graveyard with this thing. That seems okay. But again, weird deck building implications. You don't have all the slots for stuff like this, but it could be a good card. I'm going to give it a 2.75. I'm somewhere in that neighborhood. Maestro's Charm is a decent charm. I'm going to give this a 2.75 as well. All charms are decent in this set. They are. But I think this is like right in the middle between Cabaretti and Obscura. It's a fine charm. I'll give it a 2.75. Maestro's Diabolist. That's how you say it. Or Diabolist. I think it's Maestro's Diabolist. This is interesting. It can't be Vanishing Burst. It can't be killed by like a bolt effect, like a frostbite or something like that. Relatively high toughness. Can't be killed by Verse. So this is in a weird spot right now where it's actually not a terrible looking card in terms of stats, but I still think it's not the card you necessarily want to be playing in Standard. I could see how it could be a headache to play against this card, but ultimately I don't think the card like outright wins the game by itself for you or anything like that. So, your opponent can block it, but if they do, it's got the 4 toughness and it kills whatever it blocks it. So I don't know. The card might be like better than it looks and like super annoying, but I still don't think like it's enough of a piece for a lot of decks to want to play. Like, what's the home? What is Grixis midrange? I don't think that exists right now. I don't see it. I just don't see it. But the card is kind of cool, so I'll give it a 2.5. I think it's okay. Mass Bandits is the Jund fixing card. This is the one that's broken my brain in case you weren't here earlier on stream. I have not yet figured out this. I usually don't think of things in terms of this. I don't let this slow me down. I try to just discard it from my head because I don't care about stuff like this. But for some reason, this card has just destroyed me in the way I think about power toughness in relation to creatures. Because there are 3 raccoons on this card. This card might as well be called 3 raccoons. And it's a 5/5. How does that work? How can 3 raccoons take out like 5 Savannah Lions? How can 3 raccoons take out 5 dudes? You know what I mean? Like 5 humans. That's a thing. 3 raccoons is taking out like a whole rhino with power toughness to spare. 3 raccoons. Anyway, I'm really hurting. I'm cutting in my speedrun time. Anyway, the same as the other ones, except this one doesn't really do anything with an ETB, so I value it even less. 1.5, something like that. Meeting of the 5. Is it the new, sort of opposite Bizarro World Emergent Ultimatum, or is it just bad? I'm pretty sure the card's bad, dude. I'm just pretty sure this card's bad. You don't get to search your library, just exile the top 10, so you might even whiff. It gives you mana to play cards, but you're probably only going to play 3 of the cards with that mana. So is it worth, what did you get, 9 mana value off of 8 mana? So is that worth it? God, I want to like this card. And it's probably really powerful if you play it and hit on it, but you're going to whiff weirdly sometimes. You're only going to be able to play 2 spells some of the times. I don't know, man. I don't know, dude. I think, and look at the deck building implications. Almost every spell in your deck has to be 3 colors, exactly 3 colors for this to work. I kind of think it's poo-poo, guys. I'm going to give this a 2.5 because if you do play it, maybe it's good. But, oh boy, it really seems like jumping through a lot of hoops just to whiff and feel bad. Metropolis Angel is actually really good, guys. Not necessarily sleeper level. I think this is just a really good card in Limited. One of the better cards in the whole set in Limited. Just, God, is this a reason to play Azorius? Really. But in Standard, I'm not too sure about it. It probably doesn't do too much. It is worth noting it's an Angel, but even with an Angel deck on the horizon, I don't really see this. But it's worth noting that, with Giada, that puts counters on things. But Metropolis Angel on turn 4, immediately swing, and you'll draw a card, and that deck needs card draw. So, maybe Esper Angels is a deck. Maybe it is. I think that Esper Angels is probably already, even without any blue cards, without any blue angels, it's worth playing Esper Angels in best of 3 and just playing sideboard counter spells, So you already have blue sources in your deck. Metropolis Angel doesn't seem like the worst thing in the world, but it's probably bad for 4 mana. But drawing cards, and it's fairly easy to draw cards with this, is good. You want to do that in a game of Magic. So I think there's something to this. I just think it's just one of the best limited cards in the whole set, period. But I'll still give this a 2.5. I think Metropolis Angel could have some serious business. It really could. Mr. Orfeo, 4 mana is a lot. That's the problem. But you could say this does something the turn it comes down so long as it survives until your actual attack step. If it draws a card the turn you play it and replaces itself, I think that's probably good. But Mr. Orfeo is next. The best thing about this guy is the name. It's Mr. Orfeo to you. There's not a whole lot of Misters in Magic the Gathering, but it's a cool card. It's kind of a 4 mana 4/4, kind of, but not really. As far as the uncommon legends go, this one does not impress me as much as some of the other ones, and I think it's just kind of okay. You get a 1 creature, whatever that thing is called. The thing that costs a bunch of green pips, and it doubles all of your creatures' power and toughness until end of turn. We saw that in one of the Innistrad sets recently. This isn't quite that, but at least you get a body instead of an enchantment. So there's that. It does something the turn it comes into play. It can double a creature's PT or power the turn it comes into play. So there's that. But I still don't think it's a super great card. I'm just going to give it a 2 1/4. Nimble Larcenist is up next. Boy, it's a good-looking Magic card, isn't it? Whew, good-looking card. Gets the Sweeper out of your opponent's hand, gets the artifacts out of your opponent's hand, gets their Chariot out of their hand for next turn, if you play it on turn 3. A 3 mana 2/1 flying, especially one that's relatively hard to cast, is actually not super exciting. But, in a deck that also has Elite Spellbinder, you're taking stuff from them on turn 3 no matter what they do. And if you get the right card, this is just better than an Elite Spellbinder a lot of the time. It's not as much of a clock as an Elite Spellbinder, but, exiling the Sweeper from their hand probably forces scoops. So I'm going to give this card a 2.75. I think it's a very powerful Magic card. Ob Nixilis the Adversary, what people are calling the most powerful card in the set. They may be right. Boy, if I sat here and talked about all the different ways this card could be utilized, just in terms of the Casualty X mode on the card, we'd be here all night, you can sacrifice a small creature, get 2 walkers and immediately plus them. Let's just say that you cast a Shambling Ghast on turn 1, you cast Nixilis on turn 3, and you sacrifice your Shambling Ghast. You have 6 loyalty on 2 Planeswalkers if you plus them both on turn 3, and that's just from Casualty 1. Yeah, 6, yeah, plus 1 both of them. 6 loyalty on 2 Planeswalkers on turn 3 on the play. It's tough to deal with. That's very hard to deal with. And you got value off the gas, too. or the eye twitch or whatever you sacked. So just that line. It really almost doesn't matter what the Planeswalkers do. Just the fact that on turn 3 on the play, you can have 6 loyalty on 2 Planeswalkers. That's pretty good. And honestly, the +1 isn't terrible. It's really, especially early in the game, the +1's not bad. It's not quite like Liliana of the Veil, right? Like, you're not making your opponent discard a card every turn, but there will come a time when they can no longer just pay 2 life every single turn, twice a turn, right? Like, it's entirely possible that on turn 3, you double Ob Nixilis, sacrifice a Shambling Gas, kill that guy, or make a treasure token, get 2 Ob Nixilises +1, both of them, and hit your opponent for 4, right? Like, that just seems like a very, very good line to me. And that's not even counting the lines where you casualty X and sacrifice a 7-power guy that's already attacked, and then you immediately -7 that guy and, draw 7 or whatever, fresh grip of cards. Like, this card is pretty bonkers in a lot of different situations, whether it's early in the game, late in the game, behind, ahead, whatever. It's not quite as good behind, but it still makes these really good blockers when you're behind. So the card is, these double tokens are always better than people give them credit for. They block like X2s and kill them and stuff. Just so they can deal like reach damage, and like the Devil's dealing extra little damage to your opponent's face is kind of big when you're +1ing the card for 2 life a turn most of the time anyway, right? So sick little dude here. I think that Ob Nixilis is one of the more powerful cards in the set, almost certainly. So I'm gonna give this card a 4. I'm gonna give this card a 4. I think this is probably the closest we'll get to a 4 in this set review, even though it's probably not all it's cracked up to be. Let me make that a quick little public service announcement. I don't think this is quite as good as some people say that it is, but I still think it is a outrageously powerful Magic card. So I'm going to give it a 4. Obscura Ascendancy. Whenever you cast a spell, if its mana value is equal to 1 plus the number of soul counters on Ascendancy, put a soul counter on Ascendancy, then create a 2/2 white spirit creature token flying. As long as there are 5 or more soul counters on Ascendancy, spirits you control get +3/+3. This is kind of bad. This is kind of bad. So you play this, then you have to play a 1-drop spell to put a counter on it. You get a 2/2. You have to play a 2-drop spell. Then you have to play a 3-drop spell. To get 5 counters on it, you have to play a 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5-drop spell. And then after all that work, your spirits get +3/+3. But the best thing about this is the fact that it's a creature factory. Have I not read this? This card seems kind of not good to me. If its mana value is equal to 1 plus the number of... Yeah, so you play a 1-drop, then a 2-drop, then a 3-drop. Card doesn't seem very good. Obscura got a lot of very good cards, but the Ascendancy doesn't seem very great. It looks like these people were playing a game of Magic in the art. I know it's a seance, but I literally see cards. Are they supposed to be tarot cards? It looks like these people were playing a game of Commander when suddenly a seance occurred. One way or the other. It looks like that one guy's casting Damnation, like in the middle of the like the crystal ball is like a big black sphere, just casting Damnation. But anyway, I'm going to give this card like a 2.25. It's there for me. Obscura Charm, on the other hand, I'm going to give a 3.25. I think it's probably the best charm, all things considered. It just does all the things you want to do in Standard. Even the removal mode is very good in your control deck. So, and a lot has been said about, Obscura Charm bringing back not only Kaito, but in some decks, Ob Nixilis too, but mostly Kaito. You can bring back with the first mode on Obscura Charm, which is just completely busted, wide open. It's just such a good mode. You can also use Obscura Charm to get back the Esper Legend, which is the best of the family legends by a lot. So just a very good charm. 3.25, something like that. Obscura Interceptor, ladies and gentlemen. This is another one of the kind of objectively best cards in the set. Again, I said objectively, but it is my opinion. Again, no spoilers for the top 25, but boy, this card is good. I'm going to give this solid 3.5, man. I think it's right there. I know it just returns the thing to its owner's hand, but it also connives. That means it draws a card. It can get a little bit bigger, right? It has lifelink. It has flash, so it can flash in and block. Connive at the same time. It doesn't even have to flash in and return a spell to its owner's hand. It doesn't have to do that. Just flash, block that guy with lifelink, and connive might be good enough some of the time. But when it does send a spell back to your opponent's hand, that's also good. We had Venser, Shaper of Spirits. I forget what the rest of the name of the card was, but Venser, a 4-mana 2/2 that sent a creature back or a spell back to its opponent's hand when it ETB'd and had flash. We had that in Time Spiral or Planar Chaos Standard. The card was unbelievable. The card is unbelievable. I'm telling you, the ability to put stuff back in their hand or put it back on top of their library. I've said this before, but in case you haven't heard it, one of the best pieces of advice I've ever gotten about Standard Magic is that Standard Magic is a game of turns, which kind of translates to Magic. Standard Magic is a game of tempo. So if on my opponent's turn 4, they attempt to play their Asika's Chariot, right? And I Obscura Interceptor, flash it in, return the Chariot to their hand. They don't get their cats. They don't get their, life gain off of Innkeeper, whatever else they're looking for. They don't get any of that, And I get to send the Chariot back to their hand and draw a card deeper into my deck and make this guy bigger, and he's a flash guy. Basically, again, simple concept. My opponent got nothing on turn 4. I got something I didn't already have that's already pretty good and draws a card too. So Interceptor just looks bonkers, just banana pudding to me, and I think it's one of the better cards in the set. 3.5. Ognis the Dragon's Lash. Fixed Mystic Snake? Yeah, kind of. Kind of a fixed Spell Queller or something like that. Ognis the Dragon's Lash I really like, but I don't like Hill Giants. 4 mana 3/3s I'm not a huge fan of, but the lower stats on this haste guy might be worth it for the treasure token. And do note, guys, you can live the dream. Rabbit Battery on turn 1, Bloodthirsty Adversary turn 2, Reckless Stormseeker, I guess, or something on turn 3. And then on turn 4, Ognis, and you just swing, you get 4 treasure tokens. It seems pretty sick, man. This guy can come down in a later game. Just immediately make 3 treasure tokens pretty easily. It seems good, so I don't know. Maybe he's better than I think he is, but I want him to be better than I think he is. You know what I mean? I want him to be so good, but I worry that a 4 mana 3/3 haste is just not reasonable stats in Standard right now. But that said, I think the haste helps a lot, and creating a treasure token is just stupid. Even if it's tapped, it's so stupid. So I'm gonna give this card, excuse me, a 2.5. I'll give it a 2.5. That's fine. Park Heights Pegasus, really sweet looking card here. I think a lot of people have skipped over this card, but a 2 mana 2/1 Flample, it's kind of fine in of itself. That can draw cards. It's not really that hard to draw cards. The turn after it comes into play, you should be able to play 2 creatures. And because it has flying, and even trample, but because it has flying, you should be able to draw the card. If you draw 1 card with this, I think it's done its job. Any more than that, and it's taking the game over. It's not Smuggler's Copter. Is that what this is supposed to be? Is this supposed to be a Smuggler's Copter? A super fixed Smuggler's Copter? One way or the other. Card is kind of banging, honestly. I'm not going to lie. The card has really flown under the radar of a lot of people, and it was almost on the sleepers list, but it's just going to be on my top 25. I think the card is that good. I'm going to give this a 3. I think it's up there. It's up there. Keza, Augur of Agonies. This is a fun card, man. If I play any Brawl this season, this is my commander. I can already tell you. I don't know how good this is in Standard, where it probably doesn't do too much the turn it comes into play, but I guess you could have a Planeswalker or 2 set up. Draw a card off your walkers, hit them for some drains or whatever. Maybe play it on 6 mana and immediately play the Behold the Multiverse that's in, Foretell and hit them for a couple. But if this is in play for 2 turns, I imagine not only you're doing damage to them whenever you draw cards for your draw step, but, again, Behold the Multiverse, maybe combine this with that new Stroke of Genius, even the score we were looking at. And it's basically even the score is a fireball that gains life. That seems good. If you want to make your own Sphinx's Rev that also does damage, just have a Keza on the table. I really like this card. It's one of my personal favorite cards in the set, but in terms of actual mainline, top tier Standard play, I don't think it's quite there, especially with the legendary concession. You can't have more than one of these out at the same time. So I'm just going to give this a 2.5, but I do think it's a really cool Magic card. Rafine Scheming Seer is a little bit better. This is the Esper Legend and probably the best Mythic Legend in the set. Just look at this. Look at. You get to connive every turn. You get to grow your creatures every turn. This thing has ward. It's difficult to kill with the 4 toughness. It can't be vanishing burst. It has the flying. Conniving every turn is sick. This is kind of like a super Luminarch Aspirant in some way that also draws cards. That's just nuts, dude. It's so nuts. And all for an investment of 3 mana. So I'm going to give this card a 3. I'll give this card a 3.25. I think that actually is going to be tough to find a home in Standard. I don't know where this goes outside of a Solar Flare deck. Or maybe an Esper aggro deck, which you just don't see too much every day. So it's going to be tough to find a home, but in a vacuum, the card's a 3. It really is powerful. Rakish Revelers, and both of these guys on this card look exactly like people I know in real life, like 100%. The guy on the right is my friend Jimmy. I worked with him at Steak and Shake, and the guy on the left is Tran. I went to he went to a card shop that I went to for like 3 different years. Like these are like, did they pose for this picture? It's really like that. Like, these people look exactly like people that I've met in my life. One of them was a Magic player, so who knows? But anyway, this is the Naya Fixer guy, and it just isn't good. It's just not, these aren't super great, to be honest. This does at least do something with ETBs, but you know, you can pay 5 mana for your 1/1. I think you probably got robbed there. So I'm not a huge fan of these outside of the sealed environment. But I will give it like a 1.5, 1.75. I really don't think these are quite worth it in standard most of the time. Rigo, Streetwise Mentor, is up next. What do you do? Oh, yeah, it's this thing. I had to double check. You can play this guy in mono white, which is interesting because he draws cards. He's a 2/2 that has a shield counter, and whenever you attack with a player or planeswalker with 1 or more creatures power 1 or less, draw a card. So he only draws 1 extra card every turn. And I honestly don't really know what 1-power creatures in standard we're actually attacking with right now. It's part of my problem. Like, you don't really attack with your Prosperous Innkeeper, which is in these colors. You can attack with your Hopeful Initiate, but Hopeful Initiate's going to get bigger as the game goes on. As a matter of fact, in a lot of your white decks, you're going to have Anthem effects. Right? Also, Adeline, I believe, puts a creature into play tapped and attacking. So if you get a token off of Adeline, you'll miss the trigger on this. So it doesn't work like you want to with her. There's just not a whole lot of 1-power guys I want to be attacking with right now, although Raffine is on screen. As was Maestros Diabolist, right? And there's going to be a bunch of tokens. There's going to be a bunch of 1/1 Devil guys. A few cards make those, right? So, like, I'm not saying the card is bollocks or anything, but even with the potential to draw an extra card every turn, I'm not sure how much I'd rather play this 3-mana 2/2 than I would most of the other 3-drops in mono white, for instance. Cool card, another good commander here, I guess, and probably good in the whatever it's called, the Yumezawa deck in historic, but probably not very good in standard, honestly. This is another time I think I'd rather just play Welcoming Vampire, but Welcoming Vampire doesn't have a shield counter. I might be, not valuing that highly enough. So I'll admit that, but I'm still just going to give this card like a 2.25. 2.5. I mean, drawing an extra card every turn is powerful, but you do have to enable it, and it doesn't enable itself because it's got 2 power. So, moving on to Riveteer's Ascendancy. It's kind of like it's like an aura for the Clerics deck, but it costs 1 less mana. That's interesting. I think this could be like the key piece in a sacrifice deck at some point in its lifespan. So I'm gonna give this like a 2.75. I know that seems like maybe a higher score than you thought I would have given this card, but it is one that I'm very interested in, and I think it might have to wait a while to get some better pieces, but I think this could subtly be one of the absolute best payoffs for sacrificing creatures in the format, and we have been looking for some good payoffs, and this gives us those, and that's something we've been looking for. Riveteer's Charm is not a charm that I love. I know a lot of people freak out about this one because it's just like better than Soul Shatter, but it's not. It's harder to cast than Soul Shatter, so it's not instantly better than Soul Shatter. However, the card draw ability on this is unbelievably good. That second mode, you play it at the end of your opponent's turn, or when on your opponent's turn at some point, and then you get to untap and just have get a look at 3 cards. It's so unbelievably powerful. So, even though I don't love Charm as much as I do a lot of other charms, I'll still say this is a powerful card. Exiling a Graveyard might even come into play occasionally, but mostly these first 2 abilities are great. So I'm going to give this a 2.75, kind of on par with some of the other charms. Rocco Cabareticator, really sweet card right here. They're a good creature. I will say I wouldn't expect to be going and getting 6 drops with Rocco very often in standard, but if you can go and get like a 3 or 4 drop in your ramp deck, maybe, but that's about as good as you're going to get, I imagine, a lot of the time. So, even though the scalability on the card is incredible, I don't think that scalability is going to factor in to, I don't think it's going to lead to getting, ooh, I'm going to go get a 7 drop because I have 10 mana in my aggro deck. That's probably not going to happen very much. So, I would mostly expect to rate this at about a 2.5, something like that. Scheming Fence is neat, but it's mostly a sideboard card. And even though it's a really, really cool sideboard card, I'm still just going to give this like a 2.5 as well, because it's very narrow in application. You're never going to play it in best of one, I imagine, unless you're just some sort of brain genius. You probably shouldn't play it in best of one. But out of the sideboard, it's obviously pretty decent. Security Rocks. I'm going to give this, I guess I'll give this another 2.5, maybe even slightly higher than that. I'll give this a 2.65, so, something like that, because if you can pay for this with treasure, then it's obviously very good. I mean, 2 mana for a 5/4 is about the best rate you can imagine, but I still think it's just kind of a vanilla guy a lot of the time. It's not like it's Love Struck Beast, like 3 mana 5/5 or anything. So I don't know. I like it, but at the end of the day, it's still just kind of boring. And there might even be better ways to use your treasure than this. It doesn't play well with Goldspan because you still have to sack 2 treasures. It's just, I don't know. There's issues I shouldn't have with the card that I do. So I'm just going to give it like a 2.25, even though it's probably slightly better than that. Maybe a 2.5. Shattered Seraph. This is another fixer. It's 7 mana to actually cast. That's not very good. Gaining 3 life is okay, but it's still not the best. I'd probably rather have the 1/1 than the 3 life, on the Naya one. So I'll just give this, again, like a 1.5. Snooping Newsy, I absolutely hate this card. I will say, ETB Mill 2 is something that I might be looking for here and there in the, in certain self-milled decks, but I still hate that, if I fulfill the outrageous condition of getting 5 different mana values in my graveyard, that's harder than you think, by the way. If I fulfill that outrageous condition, I get a 3/3 as opposed to a 2/2. Like, oh, nice. I don't deserve that. Right. So I just don't know. I don't like Newsy, even though the ETB trigger might be somewhat valuable in the occasional deck. But the coolest thing about this card is that this lady on this card is the same lady from Wiretapping. I'm fairly certain this is the same lady that's on Wiretapping, which would make sense. She's a snooping Newsy. But anyway, even with the rogue creature type, that's even more of a slap in the face. Don't play this in rogues. Probably not. I will give this a 1.75. Soul of Emancipation is probably the last thing I'll point out for reanimation purposes, although I fully reserve the right to continue doing that. Cool reanimation thing where you blow up 2 of your opponent's things and 1 of your things to get an angel, or blow up 2 of your treasure tokens and 1 of your opponent's things, and you get 11 power, 5, 6, yeah, 11 power. Your opponent gets 3 power. It could be good, but ultimately I don't really have too high hopes for this guy. I'm just going to give him a 2.5, 2.25. As far as Adjudicators, not great. It does detain a creature when it comes into play. You don't see that every day. Which is kind of cool, but I'm still just going to give it a 1.5. Stimmy Package, neat card here, guys. I've made no mistake, no bones about the fact that I love Stim Package. Sweet card here, but at the end of the day, does it see all the standard play? I don't know. I really don't know. 4 mana. I've said this before, and somebody really hit me hard on it in the comments section, but it is like an Explosive Vegetation. I'll keep saying that. I don't care. It is like an Explosive Vegetation. It doesn't go and get you the lands, but you know what it does instead of going and get you the lands? It has the ability to make dudes. That's pretty good. That's a pretty good way to make up for not getting you actual lands. And it is still ramp. It is still ramp. So I don't know. This card could see some play. I will give it a 2.75. I think it's in there somewhere. Syndicate Infiltrator is not good. Don't play the card. So 1.25. Tainted Indulgence is a pretty decent card. Draw 2 for 2 mana at instant speed is just great. Sometimes you won't mind discarding a card in your Reanimator deck or whatever, right? So it's not even really a downside sometimes. If you do get to the point in the game where it's just 2 mana, 2 cards, instant speed, no discard, that's stupid. That's crazy. It's really good. But I still will. I'll give Indulgence a 2.75 here. I think it's a very, very decent Magic card. To Lose. This is good. I really like this guy. Basically, he connives when he ETBs, which is good enough, kind of, on your 3 mana 3/1. But whenever you discard a card, you exile it from your graveyard, and then when he dies, you get those cards back. So that's good. This guy kind of draws a card when it comes into play, but then she also, can draw multiple cards when she dies, kind of. So I don't know. I really, really like this card. I'm having a kind of a tough time figuring out where I want to put it on like the top 25. But I will still give this like a 2.75. I think this is a pretty fine Magic card. Again, I like ETB triggers and I like dice triggers. I like both of those things, so I tend to like to lose. Unleash the... Ooh, we're getting close to the end. Unleash the Inferno is the Jund thing that like kills the thing and then kills an artifact or enchantment. Excess mana value, whatever, you know. If you deal excess damage to a creature with a 7 damage, you can blow up an artifact or enchantment. This is a fine card that I'm going to go ahead and just give like a 2.75. I think it might actually see some play, depending. People are saying this card's a slam dunk to see standard play. I don't really think it's like that, but I'm still going to give it a 2.75. Void Rend is the best removal spell in the format now. Better than Vanishing Verse. Let's keep that in mind. We didn't get a whole lot of premium removal in this set, but we did get this. That's about all we needed. Along with Vanishing Verse and a couple of other spells, the Esper decks just have removal on lockdown. This isn't exile, which is a big deal. It is kind of a big deal that you're not exiling. But just destroy a non-land permanent, can't be countered, instant speed, 3 mana, great rate, right? So, again, one of the better cards in the set, and even though it doesn't do anything like to win you the game, like it's not outright powerful or anything, it's still pretty good, obviously. Like one of the better removal spells we've seen in a minute. So I'm going to give this a 3.5. 3.5. Zayatora the Incinerator. This card is exciting. This card is really exciting to think about playing with, but I still don't think it's probably good enough to really make that much of a splash in Standard. End of the day, I'm going to give this a 2.5 as well, just because that text box is so ridiculous, but, you know, 6 mana is a lot. 6 mana is a lot. Zayatora's Envoy. The more I look at this card, the more I actually kind of don't like it, even though this can deal a lot of damage. It's a pretty decent power and toughness for the rate. It has trample, which helps it deal excess combat damage, which helps it draw cards, right? So maybe I should switch my opinions of this and, what is it, Ogdus, the 4-mana 3/3 that creates a treasure token when a haste guy attacks. So maybe I should like this guy more than Ogdus, but I don't. For some reason, I want to like this guy, and I just can't bring myself to do it. I want him to have haste. That's what the Blitz is for. But the Blitz makes him cost a little bit too much for me to comfortably think he's like worth playing. So I will give this card a 2.75. End of the day, that's a good score, but I don't have a whole lot of faith in it. Let's move on to artifacts. There aren't a whole lot of these in the set. Arc Spitter is neat. This is, again, good in the Finn deck. I'll say it for the 30th time. But it is a Tommy gun. It even has like the little circular drum to hold energy. And why would it need that? Why would it need that? Anyway. Card is neat in a couple of fringe decks, and I mean very fringe, so I'm just going to give it a 2. Brass Knuckles, again, neat in some fringe decks like Boris Equipments, but probably still not amazing there, as 4 mana is not where you want to be for this. So I'll just give it a 1.75. Cement Shoes is not a great card. It's really not. I'm going to give this a 1.25. Even a 1. I'll give Cement Shoes a 1. Chrome Cat, I'll actually give this like a 1.5. You know, 3 mana, 3 power, scry 1. Anybody can play it. It's a good creature type, in my opinion. So I'll give it a 1.5. Getaway card. Neat to think about what you can do with like ETB trigger creatures and stuff. And a 3 mana, 4/3 haste is nothing to sneer at, but I still don't think it's an incredible card. I'm just going to give it a 2.5. Which is, well, 2.25. Let's go 2.25. Gilded Pinions I like enough to also give a 2. Just a 2. I think this is neat. Any deck can play it. Makes a treasure token when it ETBs. Give your big guy flying. Equips for relatively cheap. Cheap to play in the first place. Ramp for anything. I don't know. It's good. I think it's kind of good. Give this card a 2. 2.25. Somewhere in there. Halo Scarab I don't love, but it's probably a decent like 23rd card in your limited decks where you're looking for like a 2 mana, 2 power creature to fill out your curve. Any deck can play it and it fixes your mana later. So it's okay, but I hate that it costs 2 mana to exile it from your graveyard. So if it didn't, then you could just like put it in your graveyard for free with mill effects and then get free mana. But I don't know. You're still jumping through hoops. Would that really be too much? Would that be too much? One way or the other. I'm going to give this like a 1.25. Luxior is up next. Giada's Gift. Is it okay if I don't love this as much as everybody else does? I've seen people freaking out about this card, just absolutely losing their minds about this card. And I think that there are infinite combos. I know there's an infinite combo with Devoted Druid, right? Because you'll tap Devoted Druid, you'll untap it. Devoted Druid works like it taps for green mana, and you can untap it. You can put a -1/-1 counter on Devoted Druid to untap it, right? so you can tap it for more mana. So when you put the -1/-1 counter on Devoted Druid, it'll get +1/+1 for that counter. So you can just kind of infinitely tap and untap Devoted Druid for green mana. So that's one combo I know about that's neat, but you know, there's been like turn 3 infinite Devoted Druid combos in Modern forever, and it's just kind of like a joke at this point. So I don't know how good it is there, but you know, in Standard, I think that you could make the case that these like Esper and Black-White Planeswalkers decks, the Mardu Planeswalkers decks that may exist, they could use this to great effect. So there's that. One thing I will say is in the Obnixilis like Mardu Planeswalkers decks, you can casualty like a 6-power guy to get a copy of Obnixilis and then slip this onto the copy that you made, and then suddenly it's a creature again. You see what I'm trying to say? But one way or the other, I just think this is kind of a gimmicky card. I won't go so far as to call it a trap, but I do think the card is a bit of a gimmick. And Planeswalker decks don't have to use a slot in this way to win the game. They just don't. So I want to like it more than I do, but I'm still just going to give it like a 2.5 at the end of the day. I know people are going to be mad at that. People want me to give this like a 3.5, I think, but I just don't think it's as good as you think it is. I really don't. We'll move on to Ominous Parcel, kind of a garbage card. I'm just going to give it a 1, even with the versatility. The abilities cost a lot. Paragon of Modernity is also not very good. In Sealed, I kind of like this. I didn't bring this card up either, but I kind of like it in Sealed where, you know, you spend mana on it every turn. It gets bigger and bigger and bigger as the game goes on, and it has flying. It could be good in slow games there, but in Constructed, 1.25. Quick Draw Dagger, also not a very good card, just at all. Even with the flash, it doesn't really help it much, 1.25. Scuttling Butler is fun to say. Very, very fun to say. And honestly, a 3-mana, 4-power double strike guy might be even better than it might look, but I don't think the card's great. I don't. Let's give it a 1.5. Suspicious Bookcase, I always give this a 1.25 for flavor purposes. Unlicensed Hearse, neat card. I thought about putting it on the sleepers list, but the more I look at this card, the more I absolutely hate it. The more I do not like this card in any way whatsoever. But it is very good at eating cards from graveyards. It does that super well, so this could be an interesting sideboard card. I'll actually give this a 2.25. Botanical Plaza and basically all... Oh, it's lands. Botanical Plaza and basically all of these sack-to-draw card lands. I'm going to give a 2.52, a relatively high score. But I think there are definitely standard decks that could play a one of some of those cards. As far as the hideouts go, well, Broker's Hideout, Cabaret Courtyard, Maestro's Theater, these sort of evolving wilds, lands that draw you a card, but only go and get certain basic land types. We had cards like this in Mirage. I think I've actually asked for these kind of cards to be reprinted before, so thank you, Wizard, for that. This is not worse than an Evolving Wilds. I was watching a podcast the other day where one person on the podcast kept saying that these are strictly worse than Evolving Wilds, and I wanted to reach through the phone screen and do something. I don't really believe in violence. These are better than Evolving Wilds, so I don't know what they were thinking. That bugged the crap out of me. But this, like in your Ruin Crab deck, you can play these alongside Evolving Wilds. You can play them instead of Evolving Wilds, and they help you gain life and stay in the game and all that. So, I actually don't hate these cards, and I'm going to give them a 2.5. I think they're pretty good. Jetmir's Garden and the other Triomes, these are 4s. These are 4s all day. There is no denying that these are 4s. These are going to be perhaps the most important cards in the entire set in terms of impact and effect on standard, the ability to fix our mana now and all that stuff. We already saw these 3-color piles. We already saw 4-color piles. I imagine we'll see even more of those with the Triomes and standard. These make things easy, but you can't really play aggro decks with Triomes. So expect to see more control, more mid-rangey kind of decks and stuff, which we're already trending towards. So these are in some ways just the most impactful cards in the set, period, and I have to give them a 4. But have we talked about every single card in the set? Basic lands are good. Play them. Oh my God, we did it. So where are we? 2 hours and 56 minutes is what I've got on my record, on my split here. That means, what are we? 14 minutes? Yeah, 14 minutes off our best time, which is not great sounding, but I think our best time is 2 hours and 42 minutes. And our last one, the Kamigawa one, was like 3 hours and 40 something. So I actually cut an hour off of our last time. It's not bad. For now, I'm going to press stop recording on the YouTube button. So if you're watching this on YouTube, appreciate you hanging out for 3.5 hours with us. That was very nice of you. Let me know how you felt about it in the comments section. But I'm gonna press stop recording. Humana. And I'm just gonna tell my YouTube peeps to spread love and be kind. I love you all. Bye.